We have the academic 10 minutes delay. We have our attendance, and I think we should start. There is no need to wait anymore. Good evening.
Good afternoon, dear ministers, dear panelists, colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen. I am Niovi Ringu. I am the head of the European Commission representation here in Greece, and I am delighted to welcome you all here for this year's Roundtable event organized by the European Commission, the colleagues also from DG ECFIN and Reform, with the collaboration of the Foundation for Economic and Industrial Research, the IOBE, as it's known. I am looking in the room and around the table. I am sure that within the next couple of hours, we will have a very, very interesting discussion about what the future holds for the European competitiveness, and more specifically, what are the opportunities and what are the challenges for Greece. But before we start the discussion in substance, I would like first to warmly thank our colleagues from the European Parliament Liaison Office that host us in this beautiful place here today, and all my colleagues in the representation, in DG ECFIN, in DG Reform, both Brussels and here in Athens, that worked as a very good team to prepare this year's roundtable discussion. Thanks to our collective efforts and solidarity among the member states, Europe has so far managed to survive successive crises. I don't need to name, you know, COVID, energy crisis, tensions in the neighborhood of Europe. However, I think that, and we survived. Europe has survived these successive crises. However, I think that there is no doubt that Europe is now at the critical moment. Growing challenges such as geopolitical tensions in the global arena, climate change, artificial intelligence, just to name some, are affecting our daily lives. In order for Europe to emerge strong at this juncture, in this new landscape, we need to ensure that growth and innovation can continue to be fostered. And in particular, to ensure that European businesses can thrive in the global marketplace and to deliver sustainable prosperity for all people in the European Union. And the Commission, for this reason, is placing competitiveness at the heart of its economic agenda. Specifically, the Commission's work in this area is guided by the recently presented Competitiveness Compass, and taking into account also
λαμβάνοντας υπόψη επίσης
As you may know, the messages delivered by the Draghi report are strong and clear. Europe will no longer be able to rely on many of the factors that have supported growth in the past. Europe must enter in a different trajectory, which would be based on three imperatives: closing the innovation gap, fostering decarbonization and competitiveness, and increasing security in Europe. Building on the analysis of the Draghi report, the European Commission has now defined a new roadmap, which was very recently presented at the end of the last month.
Έχει μια καινούρια χάρτα που αφορά την...
This compass is based on 5 horizontal enablers. First, simplification. Second, enhancing the single market. Third, financing competitiveness, promoting skills and quality jobs. Four, improving the way we coordinate policies at EU and at national level. I think I said four, but they are five. I think I missed something. So now we know what needs to be done. And the President of the European Commission, Mrs. von der Leyen, said that Europe has everything it needs to succeed in the race to the top, but at the same time, we must fix our weaknesses to regain competitiveness. We have the political will. What matters is speed and unity. The world is now waiting for us. All member states agree on this, so let's turn this consensus into action. Quote what our president said. We know that this roadmap can help us achieve a better tomorrow. For instance, with a more integrated capital market, we expect that European companies could raise 470 billion additional funding. A European circular economy could potentially project 500,000 new jobs by 2030 in Europe. And at the same time, European businesses stand to benefit from around 37.5 billion savings if we manage to achieve our simplification goals. Now turning to Greece. Our country, the country has emerged out of multiple crises, recovering from an extending economic and financial crisis in the previous decade, the COVID-19 pandemic, and the energy crisis. The remarkable resilience of the Greek people and the strong political will enabled the country to turn the next page. However, a lot of ground remains to be covered for the Greek economy to reach its full potential. Within this context, the Recovery and Resilience Facility, what in our jargon we call RRF, remains, of course, the main instrument driving the recovery. This is particular for Greece, since by 2026, this financing instrument, the RRF, aims to disburse EU funds amounting to some 17% of Greece's annual GDP, which is a huge amount of money. Specifically, with 4 payment requests for grants and loans having been successfully concluded, Greece has now received more than 18 billion euro, amounting to more than half of the total allocation of funds to Greece under this instrument. Under RRF, Greece started rapidly to implement several investment projects in all policy areas, from energy and climate proofing to social care, digital transition, and strengthening the resilience and competitiveness of key economic sectors. In addition, Greece completed a great number of enabling reforms which have started to positively impact the economy. Give you an example, Greece streamlined the licensing process for the development of new renewable energy projects and adopted a new dedicated framework for offshore renewable plants. However, a lot of work remains to be done to fully implement Greece's plan. Being in the final stretch of the life cycle of this particular financing instrument, which is of unprecedented scale, it is now critical to accelerate the pace for implementation to ensure the timely completion. Over the course of today's discussion, we will have the opportunity to hear from panelists about the key challenges faced by the EU and Greece and investment priorities, and in particular, take a deep dive in the challenges for the Greek energy sector. We will hear at first hand from representatives from the industry and academia, and also hear from policy perspectives of high-level officials from Greek authorities and the European Commission. I think maybe I stop here without any further ado. I will pass the floor now to Minister Papathanasis for his welcoming remarks. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Dear ministers, dear head of the European Commission in Greece, dear members of the ECFIN, DG Regio, Mr. Costello, Mr. Tholoniat, Mr. Lupkin, distinguished guests, Mr. President of IOBE, Governor of RRF, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to congratulate the organizers, the European Commission and IOBE, for such an interesting discussion, a discussion that brings us in the things to come, and it will give us the opportunity to see what we have done and what we could do better in order to move to the next day. And of course, competitiveness is and will remain the core of economic growth and prosperity for Greece, but for the whole of Europe. Now, for Greece, enhancing our competitive standing within the EU is not just a strategic necessity, but a fundamental pillar for long-term economic development. We have already made significant progress in structural reforms, investment attraction, and digital transformation, but we have a lot more things to do. As we navigate through an increasingly complex global landscape, the need for a robust, resilient, and innovative economy has never been more urgent. The latest reports from prominent figures like Mario Draghi and Mario Letta, as well as the competitiveness compass framework recently presented by President Ursula von der Leyen, have offered invaluable insights into how the European Union can strengthen its competitive edge on the global stage. The European Competitiveness Compass sets out an ambitious plan to strengthen the EU economic status by closing the innovation gap, integrating decarbonization policies, and reducing excessive dependencies. We believe that the Compass is a very comprehensive plan consisting in many initiatives and actions that it cannot be implemented without significant coordination among member states at the Union level. The success of the Compass and the finding of the major initiatives it sets will depend on how decisive the policy implementation and its financing will be. Adequate and robust financing is a key horizontal enabler of the Compass objectives, and we support the proposals for the establishment of a European Competitiveness Fund in the coming MFF for a coherent European innovation and industrial policy. The Compass is the first good step towards the future, and Greece welcomes the Commission intention to place competitiveness at the epicenter of its strategy for the coming years, introducing a series of specific initiatives. Greece is also planning to make use of the Strategic Technologies for Europe platform STEP by using cohesion funds to back projects that bring game-changing innovation and significant economic benefits to the EU single market and help reduce its strategic dependencies. We already have 7 projects with a STEP seal tagging. Given that the STEP platform has only been operational since 2024, further experience is needed to fully assess its effectiveness. In this regard, a thorough evaluation of member states' capacity to engage with the platform is necessary before considering its broader application. A critical aspect of our economic future is the new MFF for 2028-2034. The European Commission has set the stage for this ambitious framework that will emphasize, and we believe it will emphasize, in flexibility, efficiency, and new financial instruments. We support this framework that it will not only ensure financial stability, but also enhances funding for strategic sectors such as digital economy, green technologies, and defense. Within the next months, all of us, governments, local authorities, stakeholders, and the European people can contribute to shaping a simpler, more flexible, more targeted framework for EU budget. Boosting Europe's competitiveness requires a comprehensive approach, one that integrates innovation, digital transformation, sustainability, human capital, and economic integration. Adaptability to global challenges, effective utilization of EU financial tools, and a commitment to reforms will define our success. The Greek government remains steadfast in the commitment to fostering a dynamic, competitive, and resilient economy. Our goal as a government is clear: to ensure that Greece not only thrives within the EU, but also contributes actively to shaping its future as a democratic, strong, safe, and prosperous country. Europe has always been a land of great ideas, resilience, and diversity. Now, more than ever, we must unite in our efforts to build a competitive, innovative, and sustainable future, one that ensures that the EU remains a leader in the global economy. Let us move forward with boldness, vision, and solidarity as we embark on this critical journey towards a more competitive and prosperous European Union. We are all looking forward. I'm looking forward to the proceedings, results of today's event. Thank you and congratulations again for the event.
Thank you. Thank you, Minister. Sorry. The floor now is with Mr. Costello, Declan Costello, who most of you know already. He is the Deputy Director General of DG ECFIN. Declan, the floor is yours.
Thank you, and good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon, Minister. It's always a pleasure to be back here in Athens. And I want to also start by thanking Nikos and his colleagues in the IOBE for their continued collaboration, and of course the European Parliament for hosting us here today. So this event is to talk about the Recovery Resilience Facility, but focusing it against the background of competitiveness and decarbonisation. And what I would like to do today is, in my opening remarks, to maybe first talk a bit about how I see the economic situation and prospects at the level of the EU, and then turn to how I see the situation in Greece. And rather than, I'm not going to be able to go into every single aspect of the competitiveness compass which has been outlined. I'd really like to focus on the Recovery Resilience Facility, partly because it's the topic of our conversation, but actually it is part of the model to help us address to implement the competitiveness challenge and address the key economic problems that we collectively face. So let me start with the economic situation at the level of the EU. Now Europe did rebound quickly from COVID and did prove very resilient in the face of a almost immediate successive economic shock of energy prices due to Russia's invasion of Ukraine. But recent years have been characterized by a period of slow growth and stagnation, where we collectively experienced high inflation. Now, more recently, so for this year and for next year, the Commission has been forecasting a modest recovery. So when we made our last forecast in autumn, we were thinking about 0.9% for the Union as a whole last year, rising to 1.5%. And it's a kind of a slow recovery. It's driven really by two things. One is that the labor market has held up very well. Employment has been good. So real wages are starting to recover also after the effects of inflation. But also more positively, we are starting to see the benefits of higher levels of public investment in particular, and a large part of that is supported by the Recovery Resilience Facility. Now, I have to say, our forecast was produced in November. Unfortunately, since November, some of the potential downside risks we had been thinking about at the time have materialized, and you're starting to see that in some of the data. Now, one obviously element which is affecting or can affect prospects, of course, is the trade policy shifts under the new administration, which, okay, in part one has to see exactly what will materialize, but it's certainly already starting to feed into impacts in terms of higher uncertainty. And also what we're observing is, energy prices have shown to be volatile, somewhat higher than we had been forecasting back in November. So, collectively, if we were doing the forecast today, we would probably be looking at somewhat lower growth and somewhat higher inflation. So the near-term challenge is maybe, a little bit more bleak than we had been predicting in November. But the real issue facing, or the real economic challenge facing the Union, is, of course, the long-term structural challenges that were, picked up in the Draghi report. Now, I think he very, very eloquently set out, and demonstrated the persistent and widening productivity gap with the US and other leading economies, and that that the root of this is a lack of innovation, slow uptake of technologies, and for various reasons, European companies really not being in leading roles in the highest value-added and fastest growing sectors. So I think, maybe some people have characterized this as a crisis. I don't know if that's too strong a word, but maybe it's not too far off being the appropriate term. And whatever it is not a normal cyclical challenge we face. It's a deep structural problem facing the European economy, which needs to be treated as such. And it's obvious, I think, that this is not something that we can close our eyes and hope it goes away. I mean, basically what we face is that the drivers of growth, which the European economy has relied on for the past 2 or 3 decades, has dried up. So, Europe is a trading economy, right? And so the increased global fragmentation that we're seeing will affect us more than other parts of the world. Energy prices. We had been relying on relatively cheap energy prices over several decades, again, linked in part to fossil fuels coming from Russia. Okay, they have come off their peaks, but energy prices in Europe remain 20% higher than what one sees in our competitor economies. And this obviously makes us less competitive, especially the energy intensive industries. And when we speak of energy intensive industries, it's not just the cars and the steels and the aluminium. This is about the industries of the future. I mean, data, AI, IT. So it's really something that is affecting us. And then finally, a lot of growth in recent years, recent decades, has actually come from the labor side due to the demographic profile. But we're aging, and we're aging faster than the rest of the world. And if that wasn't enough problems, we have to address these challenges with collectively a weaker fiscal situation. Now, COVID did raise in aggregate the level of public indebtedness. Of course, the situation in some countries is more challenging than others. We have 5 member states, unfortunately, still including Greece, where it's above 100% of GDP. But it's not only the high levels, but we know that we need to collectively have more public investment, in part to address the climate change, the impacts, to prepare and then deal with the impacts of climate change. And Greece knows this better than any member state. But also, and very topically, of course, we collectively will need to spend more, possibly quite a lot more, on our collective defense and security. So, difficult challenge against a weaker context. Now, I think Naomi set out that the Commission has put its cards on the table, getting behind the Draghi report. We published recently the Compass. Again, it covers 3 areas on addressing the innovation gap, securing, let's say, economic competitiveness while at the same time progressing with decarbonization, the two being interlinked. And then, of course, reducing dependencies and addressing our security. Now, I think that I'm not going to I'll move on, but I think the point to want to stress here is that one is that we have started to put flesh around the bones of the many elements in the compass. The Commission did set out its thinking last week, or its initial ideas on preparing the next European budget, the next multi-annual financial framework. And we also set out proposals for a simplification of our regulatory, to reduce the regulatory burden, by 25%, with an even higher target for SMEs. We're starting to flesh this out. Now, I can't go through it, but what I would really like to turn to is the Recovery Resilience Facility. Again, partly because this is what we have to deal with now, but actually it does provide, in many ways, the template for how we can start to deal with, make a success of the many of the elements in the compass. And it's not, I think, just that the Recovery Resilience Facility provides a template or interesting lessons in and of itself. Actually, Greece's approach and Greece's success in implementing its Recovery Resilience Plan actually can also give inspiration in this regard. So, just to recall, I think, some of the headlines of the Recovery Resilience Facility. Again, of course, introduced in the immediate aftermath of COVID, 650 billion euros available in total, half of that in the form of non-repayable grants. But again, it's worth recalling, it's the first time we ever had an instrument at European level of macroeconomic scale where we respond collectively to an economic, to a common economic shock. In this case, it was two economic shocks that came in very quick succession. And we did it, so the thing is, now I know a lot of the focus, as usual, maybe, is on, let's say, some challenges in terms of implementation, absorption, and they're real, and I will turn to those. But I think we shouldn't lose sight of what has been achieved. By the end of last year, the Commission, had dispersed to member states 306 billion euros. Now, this is for an instrument which didn't exist, which wasn't even an idea at the start of the first von der Leyen Commission. It only came on the table 6 months in or something. And by the end of the von der Leyen Commission, we had dispersed that amount of money, which, in terms of a pace of delivery, of getting money to our economies in the midst of a deep economic crisis, is something we had never achieved before, okay? I think you can also see our economies rebounded very quickly to the effects of COVID. And we were collectively able to deal with a seismic economic shock of our energy prices. And in doing it, we actually managed, maybe we all think this was a foregone conclusion, but it wasn't, right? Real GDP fell by 20% in the second quarter of 2020. The energy shock when we had was equivalent to a shock of 3% of GDP. These outcomes were not given. Employment, you remember we were all worried about what would happen, that we go back to the bad old days, mass unemployment, at least across Europe. 20 million new jobs have been created. Public investment, which had been falling in the decade before, after the global financial crisis, has actually increased, and a lot of it is due to the effects of the RRF. For the first time in a decade, we have been investing, or doing enough public investment so that we're actually making a net contribution to the overall capital stock. And finally, we managed collectively to get through what happened in terms of the loss of access to gas and other fossil fuels from Russia without major dislocation. I think we shouldn't lose sight of what has been achieved. And so I think it does demonstrate that when we act in a timely way, at scale, together, and also have the ambition to do things better and not to do them in the way we always have doing them, I think it shows that we can actually, yes, we face a critical challenge on competitiveness, but it doesn't mean that we don't have the capacity to react and face these things together. Now, having talked up the ORF a lot, maybe I should come back and try to also stress that a lot, and I mean a lot, remains to be done. Good that we have dispersed 306 billion, but that's slightly under 50% of what is actually available for disbursement. So if I look at the number of milestones and targets, which are the basis on which we release funds, we have positively assessed up to the end of last year 2,000. Okay, just shy of 2,000 out of a total of 7,100. So basically, we need to sort of, let's say, assess 2/3 or double again in a space of 18 months what has been done in 4 years. Okay, so it's really, if we look at what has been sent to the Commission to date for this year in terms of requests, or what member states have told us they will send by the end of this year, we would actually have to assess something like 1,700 milestones and targets, which would be a 60% increase on what we did last year. And as I said, almost the same, almost equivalent to what we had done. So it is a very big challenge. Now, I have to say, we are still confident that, especially for the ORF funding, which comes through grants, which member states don't have to repack, we still think that member states, there is a chance to, there is a good possibility to get all or almost all of that out. And I'm including Greece in that list. It's challenging, but we think with effort and endeavor, it can be done. If there's one thing, the biggest risk I see to this is actually a little bit of complacency. I don't know if it's complacency or a misunderstanding that the 2026 deadline is about the 2026 deadline. Let me be very, very clear. It's a hard deadline, okay? It will not change, okay? Making that change would require getting basically the unanimous support of all member states and getting the approval of a number of their parliaments, okay? So that, I think, is not, I think we just, the 2026, completing the investments in the reforms and submitting the request by August, if there's one message to take away from today, it's a hard deadline and it will need to be respected. Now, we are working very hard with member states to get to make sure that that becomes a reality, but okay, that's the nature of the instrument. Let me turn to Greece. Sorry if I'm taking a little bit more time than I intended. Okay. Now, okay, let me turn to the economic situation in Greece. And again, spoiler alert, there's good news here. So I think clearly, in many respects, of course, Greece did emerge, has done well since it emerged from the financial assistance program, and indeed, rebounded quickly relatively quickly from the COVID crisis, just like the other European countries. If we look at, in terms of real GDP, actually Greece has grown faster and more, like close to 10 percentage points since 2018, compared to the EU as a whole. And looking forward with our forecasts, we're looking at real GDP in Greece of 2% over the next 2 years, which again is better than what we see at the level of the Union as a whole. So what this points to is that, after many difficult years, the process of real convergence is starting to take hold, okay? And this is something to be welcomed. I think one can look at many metrics where the developments and the trajectory has been positive. Obviously, unemployment. The employment situation is strong. Okay, unemployment is slightly below 9%. But when one looks at the vacancy rate or one looks at the skill, I mean, the challenge in finding skilled labor, that suggests to me that the labor market is pretty tight. And so I think on the labor market side, it's pretty good. Greece is now in a position of budget surplus. One of my responsibilities these days is to undertake the evaluation or assessment of the medium-term fiscal plans, which all member states have to submit as part of the new economic governance framework. And the Greek plan was successfully endorsed by the Commission and the Council with no extension period required. It was literally waved through. It was one of the easiest, even boring plans that I had to assess because it was just so good. So I think, I mean, this was almost unimaginable 4 or 5 years ago. And yet that's the case. If I look, of course, all of this has had very positive development in terms of investment ratings. Going back to the investment grade. And, you know, even on the real side of the economy, in addition to employment, what one sees is that the share of, export growth is strong. And, Greece has done particularly, it's admittedly from a low starting position, raised its share on global export markets, which again is, I think all of these achievements against the backdrop of the impact of COVID and the energy is really quite an impressive performance. But of course, Greece will be affected by the long-term structural challenges affecting the rest of the Union. And again, admittedly, from a somewhat weaker, in some respects, a weaker starting position. So I think the real challenge now facing Greece is having achieved macroeconomic and fiscal stability, having recovered growth, having started the process of real convergence. The question is whether it can, actually reach its potential and actually achieve a faster pace of convergence to the living standards that we observe in the rest of Europe. Now, here, there is scope to do better, and there is scope to accelerate the pace of real convergence. What we see is that living standards per capita are about 1/3 below what we see in the rest of Europe. Where does this come from? Well, I mean, clearly the employment, I mentioned the positive employment side, but the employment rate is 5 percentage points below what we see in the rest of Europe. And it's particularly low when it comes to women, 10 percentage points, a 10 percentage point gap. I mean, clearly there is scope, maybe through an improved functioning of the tax system, maybe through facilitating easier access to part-time work to actually allow more, to close that gap and address some of the skill shortages that are observed. The other thing, of course, is, and this is probably again, over time, what will be the key driver of growth is on the productivity side, where again, the productivity rate, if you look at output per worker, is really only close to 60%, less than 60% of what we see in the EU as a whole. And okay, it's maybe a difficult starting position, but it does point to huge potential. Now, it's not going to be easy because part of this is affected by the structure of the economy and the intensive, the large share of services. It's also affected by the very high number of, or the share of SMEs and particularly micro enterprises in the economy. But it's also affected by something I think is that whilst the level of investment in the economy has improved quite considerably since 2018 or the end of the financial assistance program, the gap is whatever 5-7 percentage points compared to the rest of the EU, also on the corporate investment side. Now, that would suggest that a critical issue will be how to raise let's say the overall levels of investment so that without that it's going to be challenging to have a sustained or at least a rapid increase in the let's say catch up in terms of real convergence. Now, maybe so I think it's good progress, but also a lot of potential that remains to be fulfilled. Finally, let me turn to the recovery resilience plan of Greece, and here again. And it's a similar, well, not similar. No, it's some features of the performance in Greece match what I said for the EU as a whole, but with some important differences. I think the first thing again is, I mean, again, just to underline how important and how significant the recovery funds are for Greece. Now, overall, it amounts to about just over 36 billion euros, which is about 17% of GDP. I'm going to focus on the grant part of it because that's the part that doesn't have to be paid back, and that's, you know, that's just over 17 billion, or somewhere between 8 and 9%, 8 or 9% of GDP. Now, so you know, it's clearly a very significant amount of money. It also needs to be seen in conjunction with what's available from the cohesion side, which is more than 20 billion euros over the period for the framework period of 20 to 27. So if you add all of that up, it's 56 billion in total. It's 25% of GDP. It's a huge amount of money, right? And I think one reason it's a difference is, okay, partly it's the scale, but I also think, and I think there is, because some of the cohesion funding has been maybe delayed, as the authorities are rightly to some extent focused on the immediate need to implement the recovery facility. It does mean that there's actually still a lot of EU funding up to 2030. So I think when I read something in the Draghi report that there's maybe at the level of the EU, one has to look at the overall size of the envelope on public investment that's available. Actually, for Greece, I think the bigger challenge will actually be the capacity to absorb it rather than the lack of funding at EU level. One can discuss what it means over the longer term, but I think that this would be the bigger challenge. I think Greece has done extremely well, at least in, you know, up to now in terms of implementing the recovery fund. In many respects, the governance model that Greece has adopted actually has served as one of the examples of best practice. And what I mean by that is it was anchored around, let's say, a well-written and a well-organized growth strategy. I think it was being managed centrally with political support from the top. And there has been this coordinated approach, something that I have to say personally, you know, you didn't always see collaboration across ministries in the past. And I think this, is something, I think one sees this coordinated steer has improved. There's always room for more, but okay, it definitely has improved. So I think this is good. Greece, of course, has successfully, we have done 4 payment requests. We're processing the 5th. Okay, we have dispersed just over 18 billion euros, so 9% of GDP to date from the grants and the loans. And, you know, sort of just over 8.5 of that was in the grants. So it's, you know, very significant amount of money. And, you know, I mentioned we're processing the 5th payment request. I hope we will be able to conclude this relatively soon. Now, it still may take a couple of weeks or months. But, okay, that could lead to a further 3.1 being dispersed again, hopefully in the, let's say in the coming months. So all of this, I think, I mean, looks well. And it's not just about the Commission dispersing money. I mean, I think we do actually see things happening and reforms and investments taking place. I mean, it's very encouraging to see that 50% of electricity generation now comes from renewable sources. I mean, this was unimaginable a few years ago. If you look at e-government, you know, the services of e-government, these are now at or even slightly above what we see at the EU as a whole. The coverage of 5G compares very favorably to what one sees at the level of the Union. And I think you start to see it also in some of the reforms. If you look at the recent OECD report, which they published, you see that in the indicators on doing business, in aggregate, Greece is the best improver of the last few years and coming towards the OECD average. Now, it's important to look behind the details of that, but you know, it does show that, as I say, things are happening on the ground. Today, earlier on, the team and I visited the Independent Authority of Public Revenue to visit their new offices. And I mean, it's really encouraging to see what has been achieved in terms of tax collection, tax enforcement. One sees what they're doing in terms of the digitization of these systems. I mean, when I look at, the revenues that they're collecting from just over 40 to close to 70 billion euros from 2018 to last year, this is hugely impressive. And I mean, okay, part of it might be linked to a bit of inflation, but it's in real terms, this is allowing Greece to, I mean, collect the financial resources whilst at the same time making adjustments on the tax line, cutting taxes and improving. So I think, you know, one does see, I mean, from my own view on this is, I mean, it's inspiring. To me, it illustrates the model of how the ORF can work. It's a combination of reforms supported by investments, because there's a lot of funding from the ORF going into the digitalization, supported in turn by technical assistance, which with time, effort, and a bit of commitment, it does actually work, and it does actually deliver results. Now, but nonetheless, the reality is, as I said, a lot remains to be done. Now, as I said, we're very happy that 4 payments have been made. The 5th one is on the way. But if I look at it, this still means that 240 out of the 371 milestones will need to be completed and assessed by the end of 2026. Okay, so it's still approximately 2/3 of the commitments need to be fully finalized. And the amount of funding which is still available and on the table is impressive. We still have about, 17, close to 18 billion euros, both from the grants and the loans that can still be dispersed. That's 8.5% of GDP. Again, I really want to focus in on the grants, because that's, let's say, the most financially interesting for Greece. The amount of funding that would still be available is actually 9.6 billion. Okay, and so that's closer to 5%, well, close to 5% of GDP. So I think, how does Greece close accelerate the process of real convergence and close the gap? First thing to do, implement the ORP. I mean, give this as the number one priority. And again, I come back to what I said earlier. If there's one message to take away from what I'm saying is 2026 is a hard deadline. Now, I think we've had great discussions with the authorities in the course of the past few days, and we will continue. I think what's going to be critical is, I mean, we're working with the authorities to do a sort of a deep dive check on which of the investments can realistically be delivered. The authorities intend to come back to us with a proposal to revise the plan. Not hopefully, it needs to be done. Looking at Akis, it needs, and the minister, it needs to be done by April of this year. And I think if that is done, then there is every reason, with a lot of hard work and a lot of support, to complete the to ensure that the funds are fully dispersed. That would be, I think, the most critical thing. There is plenty of other things which will need to be done, okay? But I think one of those, I mean, much of what needs to be done is actually just to follow through in terms of the implementation of reforms and investments which have already been legislated either in the past years or during as part of the recovery plan. I mean, I mentioned that on the OECD, that there's many areas of the product side which point to an improved legislative setting. But it's also true, if you look at the OECD report, you'll see quite a big gap between what their assessment of the legal framework to open a business or to obtain permits and the perception around ease of doing business. Now, maybe that's maybe it's just a question of time for some of these reforms to take hold, but I think in reality, it actually points that what counts as implementation on the ground. And this is something which partly requires investment in time. It partly requires staffing to get, improved management, but it requires commitment, and it requires follow through. So I think that's it. Complete the ORP, implement what's been done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Declan. I think now it's the turn of Minister of State, Mr. Skertsos. Please, you have the floor.
Thank you, Ms. Rigou. Dear Declan, dear Nikos, a big thanks to the organizers. Oh, sir. A big thank you to the organizers for this very insightful event. Being a member of the original drafting committee of the Greek RRF, me, myself, Michalis Argyrou, Thanasios Kontogiorgis, Thodoris Kyllakakis, Dimitris Kalkos, Alexis Patelis. I take great pride in the words that we heard from Declan about the good quality of the plan that we originally submitted to the Commission and the good progress that we have done up to now, thanks to the monitoring mechanism and the governance model that we designed and we have strictly applied ever since. I will start from a philosophical question. What makes an economy competitive and resilient? But most importantly, what makes an economy prosperous for its citizens? I would start with the micro before going to the macro elements of the question, because if you don't live it and if you don't experience as an individual this promise of competitiveness, this promise of resilience and prosperity, then it simply doesn't exist. In this regard, harsh but true, perception is reality. And if nothing else, we have a duty to continuously improve day by day the lives of everyday citizens with greater security, stability, predictability, with better incomes, better public health and education, more opportunities for good jobs and prosperity in our country. After all, this is the mission of politics in a democracy. However, if we want to establish a common framework for honest and truthful communication between governments, academics, media, and societies regarding the true state of the economy, one that is not limited to personal opinions, to perceptions, to desires or needs, this state can and must be measured by objective indicators that no one can dispute. What are these indicators? First and foremost, fiscal stability, meaning that an economy should generate surpluses rather than deficits. Second, the cost of borrowing compared to other countries and the investment grade assigned by international rating agencies. Third, the ability of the banking system to operate competitively and finance the real economy and housing needs of households. Fourth, the level of extroversion and the share of exports in our GDP. Fifth, the level of public and private debt. Sixth, the capacity to manage and overcome external economic shocks without significant losses. Seventh, the level of employment and unemployment. Eighth, the volume of public and private investment implemented within our territory. Across all these 8 indicators, the Greek economy has demonstrated over the past 5.5 years that we can set ambitious goals and we can achieve them. We regained investment grade status after 13 difficult and painful years. Our economy has been growing faster than the European average since 2021, despite global shocks such as the pandemic, the energy crisis, the inflation crisis, and rising interest rates. We now borrow at lower rates than major European economies because markets once again see Greece as a reliable country with a credible government. We have reduced our public debt by 55 percentage points of GDP since 2020, the largest reduction worldwide, as well as private debt and NPLs by 27% or 25 billion, thanks to the Hercules program and the new framework for restructuring non-performing loans. Greek banks now operate with private capital and the state has withdrawn. A 5th systemic banking pillar was added last year to enhance competition, and business lending has been increasing annually, supported by innovative EU-backed government tools such as the loan facility for affordable business transformation loans and the My Home 1 and 2 programs under the Recovery and Resilience Fund for cheaper mortgages. We generate significant primary surpluses of around 2.5 to 3% and have nearly eliminated the general government deficit. Almost half of our GDP now consists of internationally traded goods and services, a stark contrast to 15 years ago, when at the onset of the crisis, only 20 to 25% of our economy was export-oriented. The share of manufacturing and industry in GDP has increased by 2 percentage points over the past 5.5 years, while our primary sector and energy market now produce and export more than they import, achieving primary surpluses. We have increased public investment from 5.5 billion annually in 2019 to more than 14 billion this year, and private investment from 20 billion to more than 40 billion annually. Foreign direct investment has exceeded 30 billion in 4 years. As a result, we have now moved beyond the stagnant 11% investment to GDP ratio and are now approaching 17%, just 4 percentage points below the European average. We have created 500,000 new jobs and reduced unemployment by 50% since 2019, and this was achieved through a balanced policy of reducing labor and capital taxes by 6 billion, along with lowering social security contributions by 5.5 percentage points, fostering a positive environment for employers and businesses to create new jobs and drive job creation. As a result, unemployment has dropped to its lowest level in 17 years, since 2008. The list is much, much longer, but I need to wrap up, and in order not to tire you. Have we resolved all the structural weaknesses of our economy? That would be the next question. And I would never claim that. We still have a long way to go. We have achieved stability and to some extent economic resilience in a highly unstable global environment, but we have not yet secured widespread prosperity. Prosperity is primarily determined by income levels, the extent of social and regional inequalities, and the quality of public goods and services. So there is still work to be done, but we are already seeing results, both in terms of minimum and average wages, as well as pensions, which for the first time in many years have seen steady increases that surpass inflation even by little. We also need to make further progress in reducing our trade deficit. However, thanks to our rapid green transition program, this is now a realistic target within the next years. And of course, much effort is required to push forward even more reforms. Further digitization and simplification of the state and business environment, accelerating the delivery of justice, completing the land registry and zoning regulations nationwide, which are key policy goals for completion by 2027 under our RRF program. Naturally, the enemy of good is always better. So some may reasonably ask, a 2.5% growth is good, especially when the European economy has been stagnating during the recent years. But why isn't Greece growing by 5 or 6%? Are reforms progressing too slowly, and what can be done better? A first response would be to give me an alternative plan to achieve these higher growth rates, and I will tell you how reliable it is. Another response is that some expect a country that spent nearly a decade literally in the intensive care unit, a country that literally fell off a cliff and narrowly avoided exiting the monetary union back in 2015, to now be sprinting like an 18-year-old Olympic athlete. It's an admirable and noble ambition, but not entirely realistic when we fully understand the deeper structural imbalances and distortions that initially led Greece into crisis and almost bankruptcy. Moreover, the crisis itself left lasting scars both on the Greek economy and the public administration, with severe budget cuts and underinvestment in critical public goods and services for over a decade, particularly in healthcare, in education, and public transportation. Greece doesn't just need to bridge the gap that separated us from the rest of Europe back in 2010. We must also make up for the additional gap that widened during the years of recession and austerity, when wages, pension, and critical infrastructure were slashed, leaving behind a state that was severely underfunded in many crucial areas like health, education, and transportation. So our ambition is not only to converge with European income levels, but to surpass the average, to close the massive 100 billion investment gap that was created during the crisis years. And we are fortunate and grateful to now have over 100 billion in cumulative public investment from all available European financial instruments to help us close this gap. And this convergence, like Declan said, is already happening. However, you don't go from being the laggard of the European economy to the front row in just a few years, especially when the global, geopolitical, macroeconomic, and political environment remains extremely challenging and volatile. At the same time, always keep in mind 4 unique and indisputable country-specific challenges that do not affect, to the same extent, other European countries and economies. First, the obligation and necessity to spend 3% of our GDP on defense and the security of Greek, but also of European borders, given a revisionist neighbor who has at times weaponized migration against both Greece and Europe. Second, the country's demographic profile, as Greece is aging faster than other European nations, leading to labor shortages as we speak, while also requiring a significant share of the state budget to support already very low pensions for our elderly citizens. Third, our rapidly declining but still high public debt, which forces Greece to be extremely cautious with public spending and fiscal deficits. And fourth, formerly and not currently widespread tax evasion, which is now being significantly reduced thanks to our ambitious plan to address this problem with digital payments, with the digital labor card, with the integration of POS machines and systems with cash registers, and other measures. These reforms have increased formal employment, has ensured proper overtime pay, and has cut the VAT gap in half from 27% to 13.5%, with the goal of reaching the European average by 2027. These are real challenges that we are addressing with the right policies, but by their nature, they evolve at a slower pace since they are changing fundamentally the core of doing business in Greece. It's a huge transformation of mentalities along with legal and business norms. That's why they will remain as concerns in the years to come, and no political force that claims to be responsible and aspires to govern can afford to ignore these challenges when designing and proposing policies and government programs. Ladies and gentlemen, I have said it many times and I will say it again, I consider the architecture of the Recovery and Resilience Fund to be crucial and pivotal, as it links public investments with the necessary reforms that enhance the effectiveness and efficiency of investment. Every euro invested in the economy and the state must be put to good use and generate at least twice its value in return. Unfortunately, this was a shortcoming in Greece in past decades, despite spending over 170 billion under previous EU cohesion funds that did not achieve the desired convergence with the EU, nor did we shield our economy from bankruptcy and exclusion from the markets in 2010. That is why the governance framework of the Recovery and Resilience Fund, with its binding conditionalities, which are much stricter than those of other European funding programs, is the right mechanism to instill discipline and increase productivity within the Greek public administration. This ensures that projects and investments are designed and implemented on time, on budget, on specs. And I take your point, Declan, that this is a hard deadline and we are committed to support this. This is our challenge, and with the support of our European partners, we will successfully complete our highly ambitious national plan, the largest in the EU in proportion to our GDP and population, a plan that includes 105 major projects and 77 reforms with a total budget of 36 billion. To return to the question that I posed at the beginning, what will make the Greek economy more resilient and more competitive? 10 reforms and investments which are being implemented as we speak to improve the business environment by the end of our term can be quite indicative. First, judicial reform. A new judicial map, revisions to criminal, civil, and administrative procedural law, limiting trial postponements to one, upgrading infrastructure and skills with the goal of reducing adjudication times to the European average. Second, completion of the digital land registry by 2025 and special planning reform with local and specialized urban plans implemented nationwide by 2027. Third, full digitization of the state and all public services provided to businesses and citizens by 2027. Fourth, nationwide high-speed internet, expansion of fiber optics, 5G and fast internet connectivity across the country by 2027. Fifth, energy autonomy and trade surplus in energy, reducing energy imports through investments in renewables, aiming for 80% of the national energy mix to come from renewable sources. Sixth, 25% reduction in bureaucracy, primarily for export-oriented businesses, but not exclusively. Seventh, completion of the education reform, a more outward-looking public school and university system that is evaluated and collaborates effectively with businesses, along with active employment policies that integrate more women, young people, individuals with disabilities, seniors, and migrants through bilateral agreements with specific countries. Eighth, upgrading and completion of key transport infrastructure like ports in Heraklion, Kavala, Igoumenitsa, Volos, airports like Kastelli, railways and road networks like Epsilon-65 and Patra Pyrgos to enhance Greece's connectivity with international markets. Ninth, upgrading business parks and logistics hubs through recovery fund resources. 10th, major public investment in research institutes, artificial intelligence, and education, reversing the brain drain by attracting skilled human capital from abroad, a process that is already underway. Ladies and gentlemen, right next to the resilience and competitiveness of our economies sits the resilience and efficiency of our democracies. And I will offer a final thought on this issue in a world that is increasingly questioning its effectiveness. Democracy is always fragile, and it is never enough. Whether we like it or not, in democracies, trust always comes slowly, but it can live in a gallop. And today, democracy is under attack, from within, but also from the outside of our union. We now live in a world of post-truth, of fabricated news, an Orwellian newspeak that tries to turn black into white. In a world, if you will, with many alternative truths, where common sense and experience are lost. To confront this attack, we need more Europe, not less Europe, as our foes would like to achieve. That's why I believe that the continuous measurement, evaluation, and improvement of what we do in terms of public policies, as well as keeping an open ear to the real concerns and anxieties of citizens, is the only way to resist the onslaught of alternative facts that undermine our common life and collective existence. If the economy and incomes gradually improve and inequalities decrease, then representative democracy can more convincingly claim that it is fulfilling its mission. This is my personal stance and position on the issue of the lack of trust in modern democracies, which must continually remember their deeper and primary mission. And what is that mission? To protect citizens from every crisis and threat, to reduce inequalities, to broaden the share of prosperity, of freedom, of security, of rights and obligations in a fair manner to as many citizens as possible. Thank you for your attention.
So thank you very much, Minister. Thank you very much all for being here. We have finalized the first part, and I will invite now Mrs. Chrysoloras, who is the journalist of Kathimerini and who coordinates the first debate of the roundtable. So I think we have to change. See, Kyria Chrysoloras. Γιατί θα πάμε προς το Keynote.
Shall we start? Good evening, everybody. Nice to have you all here. And thanks for the invitation to IOBE and the European Commission. Competitiveness in the EU and Greece is a huge topic, a hot topic in the EU, top of the agenda. Already discussions have started, so let's shed some more light here with our distinguished speakers, which are Mr. Mikhail Argyroux, Chief Economist of the Prime Minister here, Luc Tolonia, Director of the Directorate General of ECFIN, Ms. Rania Ekaterinari, President of the Executive Committee and Vice President of the Board of the SEV, and Mr. Marco Veremis, a partner at the Big P Ventures. Let me start with Mr. Argyroux. My plan is to ask questions and have about 3 to 5 minutes answers from each of the speakers. So let's see how it goes with the time. Please keep the time limit. And I'll start with Mr. Argyroux. So, Mr. Argyroux, Greece, despite of the improvements during the last years, is ranking relatively low as far as competitiveness is concerned. And also, I think it was mentioned before that more needs to be done. So what could you share with us the government's plans to improve this position?
Thank you very much, Irini. Thanks to the organizers, IOBE and the European Commission, for organizing this event and also for inviting me. A lot of things have already been told in the previous session, so perhaps I will not elaborate too much, but let me say some stylized facts. Obviously, to start with, competitiveness is very important in order to increase investment. And of course, investment itself increases productivity, which is another major factor of long-term growth. So here we're talking about a very crucial objective, very crucial thing. And I think that objectively, the track record of the present administration is very good. Yes, Greece in 2024, in the particular competitiveness ranking of IMD, is number 47 out of 67 countries, but it has improved considerably from number 58 back in 2019. So I think that this progress, but progress in other similar rankings, like The Economist, for example, where Greece was the country of the year in terms of improving its business environment in 2023 and 2024, but also a very good performance previously, shows that the needle is moving. And this is something that is reflected in the investment numbers. Greece is the country with the highest increase in investment volumes since 2019. And as Minister Skertsos mentioned before, we have now covered probably more than half the investment gap we have with the rest of the European Union. From 11% back in 2019, our investment ratio has gone up to approximately 17%. Naturally, this is not the end of the journey. Now we need to take next steps in order to build upon this very good progress. So my view is that if in the past 5 years we put in order the fiscal side, the banking side, and the micro side, I meant the macro side, now we have to put more emphasis to the micro, from macro to the micro, as Minister Hatzidakis says. And in that respect, we have to continue doing progress in certain fields which are conducive to investment. Minister Skertsos mentioned some of those before, but let me repeat them or add a few extra. Obviously, business environment is a key area, and this is a European agenda. Declan mentioned it before. The emphasis on simplification is a European agenda to which we fully subscribe, and we have a lot of area to improve here as well. Human capital is another major determinant of improving our competitiveness, both in terms of quantity, where the government has an ambitious agenda for increasing further labour market participation, but also in terms of quality, in terms of increasing the skills of our working population. Another important area is the area of public administration, where you have two aspects here. One is the further digitalization of the public sector, and also the further operational improvement of our administration there. Financing is another important area which is conducive towards competitiveness and investment. So we have normalized banking conditions. We're now trying to improve capital markets and also bring in financing for innovative firms, startups in the form of venture capital. There has been a lot of progress in justice, but more needs to be done. The same holds true for our infrastructure for attracting foreign direct investment. We have attracted more than 30 billion euros in foreign direct investment in this country since 2019. We have been discussing, and rightly so, about the RRF, which is 36 billion euros in total, but let's not lose sight from the achievement of bringing in 30 billion euros of FDI over the last 5 years, but we can do better. Then the infrastructure of the country is also something on which we can improve, and further incentives in order to incentivize investment in innovative sectors with high value added. Lastly, let's not lose sight of the basis on which this improvement has taken place, and it is absolutely necessary to maintain it. This progress that we have achieved so far and the basis for further progress in order to improve our competitiveness is the maintenance of fiscal stability. So in that respect, there should be no risk at all, no taking risks at all about the fiscal sustainability of the country. And that is why, as Minister Hatzidakis has recently stated, there should be no excessive increases in public expenditure, including public wages. We should maintain financial stability, macro stability in general, and finally, political stability, which is absolutely necessary for investment to be undertaken.
Thank you, Mr. Argyro. Mr. Tolonia, we have heard a lot before about Europe's decisions to move on with competitiveness. So do you think that Europe is ready and is willing, because there are doubts about it, to proceed with the plans? What are the next steps after the Draghi report and the competitiveness compass?
Thank you, Irini. Good afternoon, everyone, and many thanks to the organizers and the host to this event. So I think the message from the Draghi report and from the competitiveness compact of the Commission presented 2 weeks ago is clear. We need to do a lot more for our competitiveness. We need to do it together, and we need to do it now. Having said this, let me just flag two caveats. First, a lot is happening in Europe at this point in time. We have the example of Greece. Michael recalled a number of great progress over the recent years, and we will certainly continue discussing this afternoon. This is not just Greece. Across Europe, also thanks is wrong with Europe. It's not just doom and gloom. This is also something that President von der Leyen recalls. We have a wonderful social market economy to build on. We have an extremely skilled workforce. We have a predictable, reliable legal framework. These are also unique assets to build on. Having said this, we obviously need to do more for our competitiveness. Declan recalled right from the beginning, we cannot count on cheap energy anymore. We cannot necessarily count on an open, thriving global environment, which has served us so well for several decades. We cannot bet on a peace dividend and the good years we've had. Second reason why we need to act, and again, Declan mentioned that, sources of growth, our drivers of growth have dried out. Demographic aging is kicking in. We all feel it in our soul, in our body, but we also see the numbers, and they are quite striking. I think for Greece, it's a minus 20% in the working age population by 2050. And across Europe, the workforce has started to decline. And this is one of the things we are sure about. Productivity, the message of the Draghi report is, of course, very alarming. The gap that has been accumulated over the years mean that we are lagging behind. At the end of the day, growth is the number of people working and how productive they are. We need more people in work, working more productively. On both fronts, we are being challenged. At the same time as we have massive investment needs looking ahead, whether for our climate or defense priorities. So a very strong message. You ask whether there is a consensus on that. I would say these issues, the challenges have always been with us. There's always been a priority. We've always been acting, but the realization of the intensity of a challenge has certainly risen. It was in September 2023 that President von der Leyen tasked President Draghi with drafting its report, and the report came out a year later, and it clearly served as the analytical underpinning for the action of this commission. You have read the political guidelines of the new commission. You have also seen the echo it has had already in the strategic agenda of leaders, the EU leaders, which adopted their roadmap back in June 2024, as well as the decision of the European Summit in Budapest on the 8th of November. So you see also growing realization and definitely a wish to act together at the highest level. Now, the competitiveness compass that the Commission put forward 2 weeks ago is a operationalization of this agenda. The 3 priorities were recalled by my colleagues previously: closing the innovation gap, acting jointly on decarbonisation and competitiveness, reducing our dependencies and increasing our security. There are more than 40 actions highlighted in this compass, so it's very much of a work program. The Commission also adopted its own work program a week later. So there is by now a very precise roadmap for action. These 3 priorities are complemented by what the compass presents as 5 enablers, which, let's say, cut across the whole set of initiatives. First one has to do with simplification. And you will see next week, first, we call it omnibus package, a set of legislative proposals to simplify the EU legislative framework. A second enabler has to do with a single market and deepening of a single market. And here we can base ourselves very much on the findings of the LETA report. Third, not least, enabler financing. We discuss a lot EU and public financing now. As Michael just recalled, a big agenda will be to leverage private financing in the years ahead to meet our investment needs. A fourth enabler has to do with skills, and in a context of a shrinking and aging workforce. And last but not least, I'll stop here, coordination. Coordination among policies, different sets of policies, trade, industry, economy, finance, but also across levels of governance, regional, national, European level. I think that is a very strong message also of the Draghi report. I think Draghi says we should act more as one state, and calling for a greater alignment of action across the board. This happens in different ways at European level. There's an idea of a so-called competitiveness coordination tool. A lot of this will be anchored in the so-called European semester of economic policy coordination, which is the traditional way of discussing, updating national priorities, but also better coordinating and aligning priorities across the board. One of the reasons we were here today in Greece was also to update our understanding of economic situation of Greece. And as is usual, we will be presenting a country report with updated country-specific recommendations early June. So as a famous former Greek commissioner and spokesperson would say, I would say, stay tuned. We'll come back to that. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Telounia. Now let's turn to the world of business. Ms. Ekaterinari, what do the Greek enterprises, especially in manufacturing, what do they lack and what do they ask for to improve their competitiveness?
Thank you, Rini. Thank you for the invitation. Declan, it has been a while since we last met. I think we had many occasions of discussions and meeting during the crisis. And also we met when the RRF was just kicking off and we were responsible for 27 countries. Since then, I think Greece has made tremendous progress, and we all agree that what has been done in terms of economic growth, fiscal stability, political stability, and reviving the job market has been remarkable. Unfortunately, the global situation and the environment is as such that uncertainty is the day one life for businesses. And it's very strange to say that, when we're during the crisis, very few global or European businesses could understand where Greek businesses were standing from. We were coping with crisis and uncertainty every day. And that's something which is a common feeling in the global business world these days. So the conditions are such that in order for Greece to maintain economic growth, for sure, we need to remain focused. And thank you for telling us all the reforms, needs to remain focused on reforms and accelerate because there is no time to lose. I think some of the credit should be given to the Greek businesses, not only for surviving the crisis, they proved to be very resilient, but also for evolving and moving forward immediately after the crisis. If we see at the numbers, there is really lots of potential going forward. The industry contributes to 13.4% of GDP growth, which is above the pre-crisis level, both in terms of numbers and in terms of percentage. The industry also is the #1 exporter. It exports 46% of total goods and services, which again, it's much better than the pre-crisis level. And some industries are doing even better than in the past. So you can say the food industry, raw materials, industrial products, and so on. And also the industry is the second biggest employer, creating better and well-paid jobs than most of the industries in Greece. I think it's the gross wage in the industry is 34-35% higher than the average wage in the Greek economy. Now, despite the progress, I think there are some long-standing issues which the industry and manufacturing faces and the businesses overall. I think we talked about that. It's the spatial planning, is the licensing process, which for manufacturing, to be honest, has been improved a lot, is the speed of justice, again, problems in infrastructure when we're talking about the periphery, industrial concentrations and logistics centers, and overall public administration bureaucracy, which has not, despite the big efforts and the progress, has not been come to the standards that we're looking at. But along let's say these long-standing issues, there's some new ones which are basically, the daily problems of the businesses. The #1 is the cost of energy. The Greek businesses, and that's a fact, face the highest energy cost within the European Union, or one of the highest energy costs. And this is something we raised also as part of the Business Europe discussion. Nevertheless, not every European country and not every European business has the same issue. So there is not consensus amongst the different countries and among the different businesses that the energy cost is high, Europe compared to the rest of the world, but also there are big differences between the different European countries. Southeast Europe is facing, as we all know, since summer 2024, some of the highest prices. Greece wholesale prices have doubled since last year. So it's 100% higher, the prices year to year, February, as we talk today, since it was 2024, a year ago. And this is an existential problem for the Greek industries which export. It's an existential problem for the for the energy intensive industries. It's a matter of life or death, but also it's a problem for most businesses and enterprises in Greece. Either they export or they work here, so it's fueling inflation. We did organize a meeting with our members. It was very apparent that the Greek businesses, which are doing very well, they're sort of national champions in European markets. Now they're at risk of losing clients because they cannot pass the additional energy cost to the bills of their clients. If they have energy, for example, related formulas for revising their prices, the international client says it's none of our problems. The energy cost is not the same everywhere in Europe. We don't go through an energy crisis, so why do you want to sort of adjust, the cost of the product? So it's becoming a huge problem for the energy exporters and for the for the energy-intensive ones, which somehow needs to be resolved and needs to be resolved with immediate measures. We'll talk about later what Europe is doing, but it seems that not every country has the same, let's say, purpose. Not every country has the same urgency. So we need to be a little bit clear what happens over the next 6 months or 12 months. The other issue is over-regulation. This has been a tremendous cost for businesses and also put businesses, European businesses, at a tremendous risk. I have to tell you that I'm part of a board of listed companies in Greece and large listed companies in Greece that they have the resources, to face the over-regulation and complexity of CSRD and, sustainability regulation and reporting requirements. And we're spending hours to understand what it's about, the complexity, hours of hiring advisors to tell us what exactly to do and so on. This probably will be resolved through the omnibus package, but nevertheless, we need to think about the smaller companies and how the burden for the smaller companies will be addressed. Regarding the Greek bureaucracy and public administration, there's certain things which have improved a lot, and that's the digitalization of the front office services that has worked a lot, and it's everyone recognizes that, the citizens and the businesses, but still we need to simplify the back office, administration, and how the systems between the public sector work, because otherwise, if we don't simplify, we just digitize bureaucracy, and the issue really of, people is what we're missing. People in the industry, but also people in public administration. If we don't have the right people, skilled people, trained people in public administration who are accountable and can provide, solutions and can make decisions, we're not going to be effective towards the businesses, what the businesses want these days. And it's a pity that, sometimes people are leaving the public sector, but they're not being replaced or they're not being trained to the extent that can facilitate what the businesses want.
Thank you. Okay, business again, but from the perspective of innovation. Mr. Veremis, do you think that has been a lot of discussion on this issue? Do you think that Europe has a future in this field of innovation?
It's not a question of whether Europe has a future. Europe has to have a future in this field. And just to put things into perspective, 8 out of 10 most valuable companies in the world are tech companies, right? Out of the top 30 companies in the world, none are European, not one. We have 8 trillion plus companies these days, right? The largest European company is ASML, valued at 350 billion. This gives you a sense of the distance, right, that we have from the United States and most recently China. And this has led many people to say that the US innovates, China emulates, and Europe regulates, right? Now, the unfortunate thing about this is that what lies behind these headlines, these scary headlines, is not as scary as it sounds in the first place, right, the first instance. Because in reality, technology is 8% of European GDP, right? In the US, it's 9%. I guess the difference is we don't really rate it that much. Because if you look at what percentage of the S&P is technology in the US, it's 32%. And in Europe, it's less than 8%. Right? Looks like Europeans are still treating innovation and technology as a nice to have, but not with the urgency that the US and China treat this issue. And I think that even if you take this recent debate, the alarm around defense and how we should be excluding defense from the European Stability Mechanism, which I think is very wise, we should consider technology on that front as well, in the sense that defense these days is more than 50% software, as we've seen from the Ukraine war, right? So what are positive examples where we should emulate? I take France, honestly, to be the most positive example in Europe leading the way. Now, first of all, the 2030 plan back in 2020, 100 billion committed to tech. No other European country has committed that amount. Second, a very important initiative, the TB initiative. Philippe TB essentially mobilized the institutions and the banks and literally went and almost bullied them and said, you have to participate in this effort to upgrade France's technology capability. I think this needs to happen in every European country. And the excuse that banks have, like, it's the SSM, it's not our fault. We can't give loans to tech companies. They don't have profits. Well, let me tell you, 9 out of 10 NASDAQ listings in the past year were not profitable. 9 out of 10 IPOs, not profitable companies, right? And the banks in Europe are saying we need at least 3-4 years of profitability. Now, finally, I think the latest from Macron, the 109 billion commitment to AI just last week, is also a sign in the right direction. So I think there is a European champion, unfortunately and mysteriously to me not popular in his own country, but a real champion that we should be emulating. And I think below that, there are plenty of good European companies being built, from Spotify to Klarna to Revolut to... The problem is that the capital markets, for me, it's a capital markets problem. The capital markets are not efficient enough to be able to fund these companies to become trillion-dollar companies, right? This is not the case in China. This is not the case, which is, of course, state-aided in China. But in the US, let me finish with this. You want an indication of how the current pensioners, the previous generation, votes in terms of the future of their country. I'll tell you this. Venture capital in the US is backed 70%, that is 70, by pension funds. Okay. Pension funds invest 9% of their total assets in venture capital, which is all tech. You want to know what the equivalent number is for Europe? European pension funds invest 0.029% in venture capital. 0.029 versus 9% in the US. Now, this tells you everything about how much we believe in the future of this continent. You put your money where your mouth is, and in the US, the pension funds put 70% of venture capital on the table, and the Europeans put a minute amount.
Thank you. Mr. Argyro, I turn to you again for a more European perspective, but also focused on Greece. Do you think that the European initiatives are an opportunity or a threat for a country like Greece? And also, if you could a little bit make a comment on Ms. von der Leyen's proposal to activate the escape clause for defense investments.
Very well. European initiatives on?
On competitiveness.
On competitiveness, very well. Okay.
Do you think that this focus on competitiveness is a good thing or a threat for Greece?
No, it is clearly a good thing for Greece, and it is a good thing for Europe. And whatever is a good thing for Europe, typically it's a good thing for Greece, because Europe is our natural habitat. We are a European country, and therefore we have every interest for the European economy to be doing well, because it is also an economy to which we strongly participate. So, it has already been mentioned, Europe over the last couple of decades has had, I would say, a rather average at best performance when it comes to productivity growth and when it comes to innovation. So clearly we need to step up in that area. And I think that the emphasis on competitiveness is important both for maintaining living standards in Europe, but also for securing Europe's open strategic autonomy. You cannot be, if you like, lagging behind the big jurisdictions if you want to be influential. So as far as Greece is concerned, Rania mentioned it, we have very successful companies. We have companies that can compete. It is not, by the way, a coincidence that over the last 5 years, the export share market of Greek companies, especially in goods, increased. So it is an agenda to which we subscribe, and it is an agenda from which we can benefit. Now, let me make 2 extra comments. First of all, within the current general context, competitiveness is a big priority, but not the only priority. We also have very big investment needs when it comes to defense and security, when it comes to the green transition, when it comes to cohesion, and when it comes to common agricultural policy. So Competitiveness should be financed. It should be financed wherever possible from private funds. And also, when it is financed by public funds, it should be done in a way which is serving multiple objectives. That is to say, it's very important to fund in a common manner European goods, common European goods. A second thing that I would like to mention is that we do very well in order to invest in the competitiveness of the European economy. We have to upgrade the supply side. But let's not lose sight of the following fact. In the current geopolitical environment in which we live, even if we produce the best goods in Europe, the most technologically advanced, we are not sure whether we will have markets to sell them. So we need to make sure that we have a strong single market with consumers in Europe of high purchasing power that are able to buy those goods. When it comes to the European living standards, as Greece has been arguing at least since 2021, we are each other's best insurance policy. So along with the supply side competitiveness, we also have to invest in demand. And let me not be misunderstood here. When I say we should also invest in demand, I'm not implying that we should start throwing money here and there without any multiplying effect. We should invest across the whole of Europe, that is to say in cohesion policy, in a way which promotes long-term growth across the whole of member states and across all regions. This is going to guarantee demand for an improved competitive European supply side. So it is very important to maintain the financing of cohesion in a way that Minister Skertsos mentioned, that is to say, in a way which is well-focused, well-monitored, well-assessed. Now, last thing in 1 minute about the President von der Leyen proposal for activating the general escape clause for defense. This is clearly a statement which we welcome. Greece is a country that's never had the peace dividend, and therefore we are well accustomed to meeting very high defense targets in excess of the 2% NATO commonly agreed target back in 2006. The geopolitical outlook is well known. Our Prime Minister on 3rd February published an article in the Financial Times which was making very concrete proposals in order to increase fiscal space for investing in defense and security, and also for undertaking some common spending in order to make sure that financial stability is secured. So the announcement of the President, President von der Leyen, is compatible with these proposals. There are some things that need to be specified. First of all, what we mean by means of saying defense investments. How will we operationalize this in practice? And the last point, if I have 30 seconds. As I already mentioned, Greece has been one of the countries, one of the very few countries that has been consistently meeting the commonly agreed 2% NATO target. And however we operationalize this new system of defense spending, countries like us should not be penalized because they have been meeting the targets for the last 20 years. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Toloni, I think it's a continuation from this question. Do you think that Europe's new focus on competitiveness and the plans for the next multi-annual framework are setting aside the cohesion policy as we know it?
Thank you. I think the discussion on the next multi-annual financial framework will not be a business as usual discussion for the reasons we've been discussing. To make the link with what we just discussed, I think we took a few examples here where we clearly highlighted some of the structural weaknesses of the EU, and they have a lot to do with fragmentation. You mentioned venture capital, the equity markets. We still do not have a fully functioning, we call it now savings and investment union. Before that, we call it capital market union. A lot of efforts have been put into that for the last 10 years, and yet we still have not gone there fully, and we will redouble effort from now on. You mentioned defense, spending more on defense, certainly, but the level of joint procurement at EU level is quite limited compared to national action. And here there's a lot of fragmentation, but is of course reducing our impact. Another striking example using the Draghi report has to do with R&D spending. At the end of the day, the US and the EU spends about the same amount in percentage of GDP on public R&D, about 0.7%. But in the EU, only 10% of that is shared. Horizon Europe is the EU program for R&D. That's about 10% of total effort. 90% is done nationally, regionally, locally, while in the US, it's a federal effort. Not to mention the fact that we have difficulty to, of course, commercialize this research and innovation. So our single market is our best asset in the current times, and we need to deepen it. I mentioned the plea of President Draghi to work more as a state. Obviously, the attribute of a state is a budget. And for generations now, the EU budget was limited to 1% of GNI, gross national income, to deliver wonders. The euro, the single market, cohesion, common agricultural policy, development aid, interconnections, Erasmus, Horizon 2020. We all know these flagships financed by 1% of GNI. One of our former presidents made a metaphor to say, it's not so much 1% of GNI, it's the equivalent of 1 cup of coffee a day bought by every European citizen. So we can calculate coffee around €1, a bit more than €1, times 450 million, times 365 days a year. It's about the annual EU budget. So it's worth it. Now with the COVID crisis, we've been through quite some transformation, this famous Hamilton moment. The ceiling of the EU budget was increased from 1% to 1.7%. And this is we launched indeed a demand-led recovery. It was a massive macroeconomic stimulus to fight the worst economic crisis since the Second World War. It helped Europe to bounce back. By the autumn of 2021, we were back at pre-crisis GDP level. But not just that, it helped to keep the single market together, to avoid that fragmentation that we had seen 10 or 15 years before in the great financial crisis, member states retreating behind national borders. At the same time as it boosted the green and digital transition, and indeed help us move towards our future. This was an exceptional initiative. It has played a very significant role. We have now estimates, and we start to see more and more impact every day, because the RF is now being delivered at full speed, including in Greece. Overall, we estimate that about half public investment in the EU over the last 5 years comes from EU funding. So it has played a very significant role. There is still a lot to do, and there are still a lot of funds available, both under the Recovery and Resilience Facility and under cohesion. So this will be our priority for the coming years. Now, you mentioned the next MFF. The Commission here as well presented some first ideas last week in the form of a roadmap towards the next MFF. It also confirmed that it would come forward with more precise proposals in July in this roadmap on the next MFF. What you see, and again, the main message, I said no business as usual. It says no status quo, and it really pleads for a simpler, more focused and more impactful budget. Why? Because we have increasing needs on the one hand. Second, because we will have to reimburse Next Generation EU, and that will start in 2028. So there's increasing liability on the EU budget. But third, because we also have to be more flexible and agile in light of a very shifty environment. In this roadmap towards the next MFF, the Commission puts forward a number of ideas. Firstly, it mentions the idea of a single plan to commit each member state to deliver on priorities linked to economic, social, and territorial cohesion, combining reform and investments. Second, it mentioned the idea of a competitiveness fund, which is more to finance EU public goods, common priorities in the field of, we discuss AI, we discuss R&D, we discuss many domains that could be better done at EU level from now on. Third, external action financing, so revamping on our external financing. Fourth, rule of law safeguards across the board. This was also a very strong feature of the Recovery and Resilience Facility, this time around. And last but not least, a modernized system of own resources beyond the ones we have to secure EU funding. On all these fronts, the Commission initiated public consultations, so there is a chance now to engage through different websites, and that will inform us ahead of our proposals in July.
Thank you. Ms. Secretary, do you think that the Greek companies, the Greek manufacturing companies can benefit from Europe's new competitiveness policies? And also, could you please tell us if you think, when do you think that Greece can close its investment gap with Europe?
The second question probably will take longer to answer, but let's start with the first one. Obviously, SEV and Business Europe, representing the Greek businesses, the Greek industries, and the European industries, welcome the competitiveness compass, which was announced by European Commission, because it brings, as we all discussed today, competitiveness at the heart of the discussions and legislative actions in relation to the decarbonization, the green transition, innovation, investments, the labor market, and so on. So I think we're very happy that Europe is willing to move faster in a more simplified way and make some quick and bold decisions. I'll start with the Omnibus simplification package, which basically aims at three things: to simplify all the sustainability reporting requirements, to simplify reporting and bureaucracy for the SMEs, and also to simplify investment requirements. Starting with the big companies, I think most of them were prepared for whatever is requested under the CSRD. Nevertheless, again, we need to see how this will work in practice, because this is the first year that will be implemented. But I have to tell you that this created enormous and unnecessary costs and also risks, because the penalties, if something goes wrong, from now and going forward, are pretty big, both for companies but also for individuals, for management and the board members. Again, it's very good to see that the Commission focuses on the SMEs, and they're talking about simplifying the rules and have much more practical guidelines for compliance with the ESG criteria for the smaller businesses, meaning 1,000 employees, less than 1,000 employees, and 450 million, which is great news for the Greek businesses, because we have much smaller sizes than that. And basically have postponed the deadlines for reporting beyond 2026 and 2027. Also, we understand that the CS3D will be part of the simplification package, because that was another very complicated, let's say, framework, and it may have to be revisited and simplified in a way that not creates, additional burden and costs for the businesses. All this remain to be seen, because at the end of the day, we have to see the real impact on the daily life of the businesses. We welcome this, but we need to see how our lives will be simplified. And at the end of the day, the overall regulatory burden has to be reduced, because we're saying one in, one out, let's see this and that, but at the end of the day, the equation never becomes zero. It's always we add more bureaucracy and more things to comply. It's good that the European Commission starts listening to the businesses. Business Europe has submitted 68 concrete proposals on how to simplify regulation in Europe. I think it was like 2 weeks ago that Commissioner Dombrovskis asked for businesses to come to his office and discuss what they think are the biggest problems they face in terms of regulation and what solutions can be found. Again, it proved to be a good exercise, because everyone in that meeting agreed that we do have a problem. However, not everyone in that meeting agreed that we have a common approach of how to resolve the problems. So there were different opinions between different industries, different sizes of companies, different companies coming from different markets, and so on, which again proves the fact that not all businesses, not all governments, not all Europe is unified as to what needs to be done and what needs to be done as a priority. The second most important thing that we're waiting now, it's the Clean Industrial Deal. And I think there was 2 or 3 documents which were leaked by Brussels. That was the framework, the action plan on affordable energy and the framework for state subsidies. Regarding affordable energy, it's something which is very critical, but for some countries like Greece, it also has the sense of emergency. The plan talks about, for example, interconnections and reinforcing the grids, which is a great thing, but that will take time. First, you need to pay the cost before you reap the benefits. It also talks about more flexibility. It boosts flexibility in the markets, which again, it's a great thing to optimize how electricity market works. But not all countries and not all citizens or industries or businesses can invest to become more flexible when it comes to demand. It also talks about lowering, the taxation on tariffs, which again, stays at each government to see how this affects the public revenues. And amongst others, it also talks about long-term contracts that somehow they will be decoupled. The price of electricity will be decoupled for the volatile prices of gas. That's a great thing to happen. If we can have a PPA market for big industries and energy-intensive industries that have PPAs with predictability for 10 years, that's a great thing. But I'm not sure how it's going to be implemented. Again, we're talking about different countries, different energy mix. In France, for example, PPAs are linked to nuclear energy. That's a base load, generation. If PPAs are linked to renewables, that's a different story, or to photovoltaic, because you have a shaping cost. I'm not trying to say that what we've read since the last 2 days are not great news. I'm just saying that the devil is in details. And usually, each country, each industry have different problems and different technical characteristics to face. So I'm not sure how fast and how efficiently, we'll be able to resolve our problems. At least I'm talking from the Greek industry's point of view. Also, there are other measures which, are equally important, and I'm sure Marcos will talk about regarding technology and AI, pharmaceuticals. We're reviewing that, what it means for our members in the pharmaceutical sector, and obviously defense. I'm sure there must be opportunities for Greeks since we are paying 3% of our GDP or 2%. I don't know what's the real number, but certainly it's a big number of GDP in defense. We may as well, take the benefits of having some of the opportunities around the defense industry coming to the Greek market and to the Greek economy.
Thank you. Mr. Veremis, you talked about Europe. Now, is Greece a good place to invest in innovation? And what incentives do you think would help?
I mean, as someone who has been involved in the tech sector in Greece since I was 27, I'm now 52. I founded 2 companies that have gone global. I've invested in 40 companies, some of which were bought by Microsoft, Meta, big private equity, etc. So my experience has been that this is a fantastic place to create tech companies. No question about it. Now, I guess, what do the numbers show? The numbers show that Greece was completely absent from the tech space up until 2018, 2019. Equifund and then HDBI really contributed in boosting this ecosystem. And in a very short period of time, the total market capitalization, as we've measured at SEV, of these tech companies exceeds 10 billion, right? That's a pretty remarkable thing in such a short space of time. I did a calculation that, about 500 million have been invested, and over 8 years, the return has been 10 billion in terms of market cap. It's a very, very strong investment here. Why is Greece a good place, right? I guess some of our European friends may be wondering. Well, the first thing is talent. Greece has one of the highest percentage of graduates from the STEM fields: science, technology, engineering, mathematics. 26% of graduates in Greece graduate from STEM fields. STEM fields are really the talent pool from which you hire when you're building a tech company. I think we're in the top 6 in the world per capita in STEM graduates. Okay. Another data point that you will find surprising and interesting is, given the fact that life sciences, health, technology, and defense are coming together because technology dictates most of these fields, an interesting statistic is that in Greece, 44% of postgraduate students are female in these fields. Like the average OECD number is 32. So that's an interesting statistic as well, right, in terms of diversity and interest. And finally, you know, Greece has a very, very strong diaspora. We've calculated that the size of companies built by first-generation Greeks in the US in technology and life sciences exceeds 200 billion, right? 200 billion is the size of companies built by Greeks in the United States. Now, this is an incredibly strong reservoir of talent and advice for Greece, right? And we're making full use of this as investors and as tech entrepreneurs. Now, what more can we do, right? What more? We've done well so far. What more can we do? Well, we need to set a clear objective that, given that tech is about 1% of Greek GDP, I think any self-respecting Western country needs to be above 7-8%, right? If you are below 7% of your GDP coming from tech, means you're not a Western country, right? You are an emerging market, and you know, the average in the US is 9.5%. The average in Europe is 8%. Greece needs to go from 1 to more than 7% in the next 10 years, for sure. Now, how do we get there? The amounts that we are spending are still small. The average per year on venture capital is about 100 million in Greece. The equivalent in the UK is 16 billion. So if we adjust it even by population, we're still 20x below the UK. If you look at France and Germany, they invest about 1.2 billion a year. Again, we're 10x below. Of course, if you compare us to the US, 200 billion per year, we're 50x below. So we need to spend more. How do we spend more? I think one is we need to make full use of EIB, EIF resources on that front. We've been talking with Orestis Kavallakis about RRF. Unfortunately, at the moment, pretty much excludes completely technology because it requires that companies are profitable for 3 years, SSM rules, etc. So you know, in terms of loans, it's very limited capacity. We need to think about this, how we can navigate this problem. And then, of course, you know, I think we really need to create initiatives like the TB initiative to see how we can mobilize private capital. Private capital in Greece is not going to technology. Private capital in Greece, much like the rest of Europe, is very conservative, very conservative. We need to push institutional investors, pension funds, absolutely, pension funds need to be investing in the future of their own country, right? The pensioners need to take care of their kids and their grandkids, right? Which is what the US pension funds are doing. So I think we need to create some kind of TB-like initiative. We've invited TB actually in Greece. He has a house here, so he loves the country. He's here like every 2 months. He can help us understand more about what we can do. And finally, you know, I would say that all the information that we need is in the Draghi report, in the Letta report, and looking at the competitiveness compass, it's all there, right? It's all there. But I would put an extra emphasis out of all the, you know, simplification, single market, financing, skills, coordination. I think the 2 most important ones are probably single market and financing, right?
Thank you very much. And I think we will close now this session. Thank you for listening. I hope it was interesting for all of you. Bye.
And actually, so that we can have some discussion after the initial round, if you so wish, you can actually sit around the table so that we make justice to the title of this, which is a roundtable discussion. No?
Actually, it's a roundtable, but yes.
It's an over. Πρέπει να έχουμε ένα μικρόφωνο. Κάτσε δίπλα στην Κατερίνα. Okay. My name is Nikos Vetas, General Director of the event, Professor at the Athens University of Economics and Business. I have the pleasure to moderate this discussion, which in some sense is going to take stock of where we are regarding the green transition, which has at least two legs. One is what it does to the environment. The other is what it does to the investment front in Europe. But I think that what may cut across all of our discussion is that there may be a new deck of cards on the table now regarding not only the speed, but also the direction of where we may be going. I'm not going to make initial introductions. We're going to blend this into the discussion. I would like to give initially the front to Johannes Lublik, who is the director in the Reform and Investment Task Force. And I'm going to start with a very easy question. And the easy question is that the stated objective of the Commission is to bring together, on the one hand, decarbonization and competitiveness. And can we see really that this leads to low energy prices? Or are these two objectives working in opposite directions in terms of where we are and in terms of where it seems we may be going? Let's keep the first round as short as you like, and then we proceed.
Thank
and
you.
It's a big pleasure to have you here.
I just wanted to say it's really a big pleasure to be here, and thanks to the organizers, thanks to the European Parliament Office for hosting us, and thanks for moderating. I think affordable energy prices, lower energy prices are one essential element what the Commission has in mind also for the next mandate. It comes very much from the Draghi report, where lower energy prices and decarbonization is clearly not in opposition, but very much go together. It's anchored in the competitiveness compass, where also decarbonization and energy prices go together. And I think in the coming weeks, the Commission will adopt the Clean Industrial Deal. And one of the elements of the Clean Industrial Deal will also the Energy Prices Action Plan, in order to deal with this high energy price in Europe, which are, as we all know, considerably higher than in the US, especially, but also in China. How to do that? And I think we can take a bit of inspiration what has happened in the last 10 years in Greece. Therefore, it's a modernization and decarbonization of the energy system and an integration of the EU electricity market. The big question, of course, which you also raised is, in a way, is there a possibility to go back to fossil fuel? Is it cheaper? And I think looking at the economics, it's clearly not cheaper. Therefore, Greece has quite early began the phase out of lignite. And if you look at the CO2 allowances and where they stand at the moment, that makes lignite-fired power plant extremely expensive. And also gas-fired power plants are very expensive. If we go a bit more into detail how to achieve all that, I think then I would mention 4 points. Therefore, on the one hand, it's more renewables capacity. Second, strengthening grid infrastructure, which is on the one hand necessary to accommodate more renewables capacity, but also to have larger markets. The third point is flexibility and storage. We know all that renewables are intermittent. Therefore, also demand must, to a certain extent, be adjusted to that. And therefore, the whole system must be more flexible. Fourth point is more interconnection capacity, therefore more integration with neighboring countries. And also better integration of markets and to avoid price spikes. So then looking at what has happened in Greece in the last 10 years, then I think looking at the renewables capacity, and especially share of renewables in the electricity mix, I only found the figures from 2023, therefore 57%, they must be higher by now. Comparing the generated electricity to 2014, therefore there's a 150% increase. If we now look, I mean, we have been talking about the recovery plan quite a bit this afternoon, and also for the energy part, the recovery plan has been really structuring the process and very much accompanying the process. And looking at the 4 elements I mentioned before, I mean, 3 of them are captured in the recovery plan. Therefore, the first is the increase of renewable generation. Therefore, we have the increase of investments by 3 gigawatt until this year, which is anchored in the plan. And I think in reality, it has become much bigger. And that is especially also due to the reforms which are in the plan. And the reforms which are in the plan is the facilitation of spatial planning for renewables. And second, also the licensing regime with the digitalization of the procedures, short and binding deadline. And of course, for the future, there is the whole offshore wind framework, where we have it overall, the offshore wind framework, and then the spatial planning for offshore wind, also in the recovery plan, which should really, looking forward to 2030 or beyond 2030, that will bring a big difference. The second is the strengthening of grid infrastructure. I think what is extremely important, given the geography of Greece, is the interconnection between mainland and islands. And with the RRP, these interconnections with the islands are being financed, therefore, between Lavrio and Serifos, between Folegandros and Naxos to Tira, and therefore allowing also highly emitting diesel power plants to shut down at one point in time, once this is all operational. Then I had the opportunity to go to last year to the extra high voltage center in Koumoundouros, therefore which is removing the bottleneck between the Peloponnese and Attica. And also, if I recall correctly, there is the cable then to Crete, which has been supported by the RRP with 200 million euros. Therefore, really, I think the CEO proposed a slogan at the time saying that the EU is banning the risk of blackouts. We thought at this time really to take that over. The other point is the medium voltage system to accommodate renewables, also supported by the RRP with 100 million euros. The next point I wanted to go into is flexibility and storage. If you have a renewable system, if you have with a system relying on intermittent renewable, of course, flexibility and storage is essential. And it's essential to adjust demand, and it's essential to adjust supply via storage to when it's needed. Therefore, we have a huge storage scheme in the RRP to support batteries, but especially also to support the renovation of Amphilochia, big storage, okay. Reforms on demand response, then also regulatory framework on smart grids, in order to also have retail customers benefiting from dynamic pricing via smart meters and for the technological essentials there. So this is in a way what is on the plan, but of course we want to go further. Therefore, all of that needs to be implemented, and especially flexibility needs to be enhanced. I haven't touched upon the interconnection to other member states, where also the capacity Bulgaria has been strengthened. it's an essential point really to align energy prices in the EU and to make sure that energy prices in Southern Europe are no longer higher than the ones, let's say, as of Austria, and then going further north, where, of course, Sweden has much, much, much lower energy prices. That really must go further. I understand the interconnection with Bulgaria, this hasn't been financed by the RRP, but by other European measures. Yeah, and on that basis, I think also looking at the energy flows, then Greece is becoming is really on the way to become an energy hub in Southern Europe, and also making sure, also ensuring competitiveness of industry in Southern Europe, but also let's say being competitive in the energy system itself.
So thank you for mapping up all the issues and how they kind of mature. We're going to come back to some more specific in the second round. And also, I guess what Kostas Kartalis is going to talk about is coming from the, let's call it science side, how this affects costs and the economy. But now we have the privilege to have two people that do not only observe, but they also do things. In the sense of running businesses that are very important parts of the puzzle of what we make, of what we are discussing. So before they say a couple of words about the topic, what I think is more essential is to ask each one of them, starting with Andreas, who is the CEO of the Olympia Group, to tell us what it is that you do now and why. And I'm going to ask the same question to Katerina and to Eleni.
Thank you. First of all, it looks like a private tutorial here, but hopefully there are thousands of people watching us because they are interested about decarbonization and competitiveness. I am the CEO of Olympia. Olympia Group is an investment arm who owns Sunlight, and I'm gonna talk on behalf of our excellent team that does work on Sunlight in terms of energy and batteries. And I will take the opportunity to talk about a small but global ecosystem. It's very European because we tend to complain about things. Of course, I will complain today, but there are opportunities for Europe to have competitive industries, and I will share some views here. And I will just I will start making a contrast between decarbonization and competitiveness. And there is an industry that I think that, like ESS grid, that the competitiveness arm will come much later, if it comes ever, because the value-added component is a Chinese lake. The raw material to generate electricity, the wind farms or the photovoltaic parks, are all Chinese, or if not all, 99%. The batteries are Chinese to store. The inverters are Chinese. The DC blocks are Chinese. So there is a Chinese flag everywhere. And all the attempts by Europeans to compete into that have failed. And why have they failed? Because we're stupid? No. Because China has invested almost 20 years in this phenomenon, and our estimates talk about an investment in the form of 280 billion. And now whoever tries to compete on price and quality, because my friend earlier on said that China emulates. China does not emulate anymore. That's a big mistake. China leads the way on technology in terms of batteries and in terms of many other components. And if we haven't realized that, I can invite you to our factories to see how that is the case. But so on the ESS grid, of course, we may get some cost reduction versus other fuel, maybe, we shall see. But insofar as the value added in developing these things, there is no competitiveness in Europe. Now, but there is a sector in the same family, which is the industrial traction, the forklifts. The forklift industry is around 40 billion around the world, and the batteries component is around 8 to 10 billion. We represent a company that is making 1 billion out of the 8 billion, and it's a purely Greek company, 98% owned by our investment arm. Now, if you look a bit deeper, and I was talking to some people that they've been doing work for years, this is a very European company, not only the company, the industry. You have Juhainer, you have Kion, you have lots of German companies together with us that we cooperate for years and we compete globally. We didn't get any subsidies. We didn't get any compulsory migration that has generated this electrification. There was one common denominator. Businesses that had warehouses, logistics, saw the economic impact. The first phase was economic impact. They could run their factories, their logistics faster, safer, and better. Nowadays, they look even more based on AI, machine learning, because the batteries are living organisms, so we get data and we even make sure they don't crash or they utilize the energy generated. So it can be done, as a matter of fact. And this is the positive angle from this discussion. And actually, Europe leads globally this industry. We are even bigger than the US counterparts. Now, competitiveness in our industry requires R&D, product excellence, economies of scale, and end-to-end supply chain. Part of on lead batteries, we own end-to-end. We even do recycling in Komotini, and we control end-to-end this supply chain. The problem with other forms of battery like LFP and lithium is all the supply chain is in China. So there is no easy way to control that supply chain. Now, in our industry, which is quite important industry, because we control all the warehouses. If we had a magic way to stop all our batteries working, I think around 40% of warehouses around the world couldn't function. So we could find a way to make some good money there. Now, this industry has some risks, and these risks can be extrapolated to many other areas of battery businesses. First of all, raw material. China controls antimonium. They put some barriers and some restrictions to China, and they raise the price of antimonium to a level that we're not competitive anymore. And we are fighting with our customers who is going to pay for the increased price of antimonium. This is one of these rare earths material. So the dependency of these things is beyond imagination. They do it, you have to respond. Now, if EU and other players respond over the next 10 years, somebody may go out of business over the next 10 years. The second area is the tariff escalation. We already revise our budgets because we have tariffs phase 1, we have tariffs phase 2, and will be impacted. I don't think China cares too much for the time being, because it has been calculated that the cost advantage of China is over IRA plus tariffs. It is better than the cost to produce in the US. The US may need to raise tariffs to 100% to come into terms. And every year, lithium prices drop by 30%. So, but for European companies and players for ourselves, tariffs do matter, and they will matter much more. The third is, it's impossible as we stand to build gigafactories in Europe for batteries. The only place where they make gigafactories are Chinese. China and Hungary, 16 billion FDI. China and Spain with automotive manufacturing. Outside automotive manufacturing, there won't be much to happen. The last comment I'd like to make is the following. I think we have a different definition. Maybe we have different watches of time. The time response on some of these events for people in industry is of essence. And we have two big, let's say, competitive forces. China, in some areas, we compete against states. China, as I said earlier on, has invested for 20 years a couple of hundreds of billions. So they can wait. They can maybe wait for centuries. At the same time, their companies can react fast. Europe doesn't react fast, declares fast reaction. But I'm afraid there's a big gap between declaration and ability to implement. However, as I said earlier on, I haven't come here to complain. I think there are also some opportunities. First of all, Europe must build ecosystems on niche markets. I don't think we can compete on free wild sea with China, where economies of scale matter. But there are, even in energy, industrial traction, defense, marine. Why would should we let China to dominate marine industry on batteries? Because it's coming, is here. Second, quality specs. I don't think Europe has done a lot of work on specs. Batteries flow from China without much control on specs. And this is something we may regret because all the ESS grid plants are there for 20 years. So somebody has committed, hey, they will exist over the next 20 years and the batteries will function over the next 20 years. Okay, we will be here. Let's see. Funding. There are a lot of vehicles, European vehicles, to support funding. Problem with these investments is unless you have 20% guaranteed offtake from clients, nobody's going to finance your project. So just funding is not enough. We need to offer special vehicles of guarantees in order for equity funds to step in. For equity funds, investment in energy at the moment doesn't look very good. On ESS grid, no company makes EBITDA more than 4%. With 4% EBITDA, you don't cover the costs even for the letters of credit and warranty. So many of the players who make ESS grid projects at the moment, maybe they are in losses. So fourth dimension, R&D. Many countries over the last 2-3 years have stopped funding research projects on batteries in Europe. One of them was Germany. Without R&D, just CATL, which is the biggest player globally, has 20,000 R&D engineers and 1 billion a year on R&D. Okay, if you think we can compete, let's try and compete. The last comment is back to this idea that we need to build some ecosystems, European ecosystems, industry, suppliers, value chain on niche markets around energy. These are areas we can be much better. This can be the C&I, energy storage for manufacturing. As I said, marine, defense, industrial traction. These are areas we can compete and we need to support. The big ocean, we can leave to China and cooperate with them or to the US. US has not managed well also. Thank you for this part.
Okay, thank you, Andrea. Same question to Katerina Sardi, who's the managing director for Energean. And before you open up a little bit your view, I think it's extremely important to ask what it is that you are doing these days and why.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you also for this invitation to sit in this very, very interesting panel. What we're doing this, I'm actually sitting here in wearing 2 caps. One relates to energy and oil and gas. We are the only oil producing company in Greece. We are producing almost 1% of the daily consumption. So this is a very small amount. But still, we are the only oil producers in Greece. And if you ask about competitiveness in the global oil market, of course, this is low because quantities are low, OPEX is high, and the energy cost over the last years has increased by more than a factor of 10. We used to pay 17 euros per megawatt hour. We pay more than 180. What we're doing overall as Energean, we're an independent oil and gas producer. We are producing more than 60% of Israeli gas demand, about 8 BCMA. This is more than a whole consumption of Greece. We operate the largest floating production and storage vessel in East Med, from where we do the oil and gas production for Israel. And we own various other assets in the Med. What else we're actually doing now, and here comes the fascinating part with my other hat, as Earth Greece. Earth is the new subsidiary of Energean. And we are receiving a grant from Recovery and Resilience Facility for the development of Prinos CO2. Prinos CO2 is the carbon storage facility in Greece. And as I was telling Johannes during the break, due to become operational in the end of 2026 with 4 wells to be able to receive CO2 of up to 1 million tons per annum. Last month, Prinos CO2 was also awarded a grant from the European Connecting Europe facility because it is a European project of common interest. And the scope of this new grant is to build a receiving liquid CO2 terminal at Prinos with a view through this terminal to connect hard-to-abate industry of Europe to Prinos. So this is what we're doing. And when I was invited in this panel, I thought, okay, this is nice. What has this to do with competitiveness in Europe? And because clearly we cannot discuss about the competitiveness of a CCS chain at this stage. Why? Because there are very few in Europe, in the world as well. So we are at a point where there is a recognized market failure, as we say, and here come the grants, RRF or Connecting Europe Facility or other tools to improve this competitiveness so that we can discuss about competitive CCS chains. But I did my homework and I went and checked what is actually included in the compass, in the new competitiveness compass. And when I read the various elements of a compass, I realized that this project contributes to, provides input to some, or receiving output from 6 out of the 7 pillars of this competitiveness compass. And so the only one where we do not contribute and we do not receive neither input nor output is the one related to artificial intelligence, because this is a very solid project, old way, heavy construction project. But on the other hand, if I am to look at the various elements, I see, first of all, I will start with turbocharging investment, where the Commission describes their commitment to accelerate green transition, and the grants that this project is receiving is a manifestation of green transition. Nevertheless, this is a very risky project. Why? Because there is a risk in the subsurface. There is a risk in the commercial part, because we may be ready, but we are the storage providers. There are other elements in the chain, transportation, CO2 capturers, a very high cost. So many risks. And I was very interested to read about these risk absorbing measures that are included in the, or will be included in this competitive package. And then I checked other elements circular and resilient economy. We are committed in circular economy as a company. A green industrial deal. This is the new part, but it also stems from the Net Zero Industry Act of last year. It also will include an Industrial Accelerator Act. So here, which would require, as I understand, for companies to develop green products. And here we are a contributor because Prinos CO2 will allow for the greenness of industrial products. Prinos CO2 is, through its participations in EU Horizon projects, is already offering the ground for testing of European products like sensors or other verification. We are contributing to the union skills because it will be an incubator for skills. It will provide for the continuation of basic skills, but many, many new skills in this new CCS chain. And then I read, and I'm leaving it to the last, making business easier, this commitment. And I also read about the single market, and I thought, hey, everything would be in place. But this, we also heard from Mr. Costello that there is a time urgency. There's a time urgency for RRF. There is a time urgency also to reach the decarbonization targets. And what is needed is regulatory barriers, and other of this type of barriers could not just interrupt this chain, but it could also cancel this chain completely. So what is necessary is a simple framework, a versatile framework that would support this investment, storage, but the full chain to happen yesterday. And I think this is my contribution. And also single market, there is a lot of experience from electricity, a lot of experience from gas in this single market, the single European market. Soon we will be discussing about the single CO2 market. So let's look into the best practices, tested practices from energy. Not all practices from energy are bad. Some things have not worked, but others have worked. The single market has worked to a very big extent. And let's draw from these lessons to the new CO2 market.
Okay, thank you. And before we go to the third of these, I would say not just interesting, but important case studies, just to sum up in some sense. So I guess, Johannes, you would agree, we have here two examples so far, before we even go to the third, of business cases where technology, value creation, and how this cuts in global markets exist in Greece. So I would like to turn to Eleni Polychronopoulou, and the same routine. Before we open up a little bit, what it is that you are doing these days and why?
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the invitation also. Okay, so what we are doing, we are making marine equipment. This is what we are doing, and we are doing it in Greece and in Europe. We started by following the environmental regulation. This is what we have been always doing. We started with MARPOL, and then for the regulation that has to do with the control of invasive species carried around by ships. And now we have to deal with decarbonization. So we are doing this as a group, as a company, but also as a small part of the Greek economy, which is the marine equipment manufacturers and exporters. So we are producing equipment for ships. Just to give you some numbers, there are 111,000 customers for us. Half of them are controlled by Europe. The deep sea going vessels are 35,000, and this is the main market. In Greece, we have 5,500 vessels. The control is done by here. The decision makers are here. However, the vessels are built in China. 71% of the orders is Chinese. 9% are in Europe. Now, Mr. Athanasopoulos said about niche markets. Yes, we have two niche markets. One is the high added value vessels that are being built in Europe. Green vessels, digital vessels, high technology vessels, offshore supply platforms, passenger, and most importantly, cruise. Of course, we risk to lose them all. But right now, Europe is standing strong. And then we have the equipment. The retrofit of the 35,000 plus vessels of equipment that will lead them to decarbonization. So there are two major measures that you can take to decarbonize a vessel. Either operational, so you operate the vessels better. Like in my previous car, I had a Toyota RAV4, and there was the application, don't spill the water. So drive safely, don't spill the water. If you spill the water, this means you have emissions. The same is with ships. Operate them carefully, and the emissions will be less. But there are also the technical measures, and this is where we come into the picture. We are making solutions for cold ironing, so connecting the vessels with the shore during the port stay in order to eliminate the emissions 100%. We do systems that make the efficiency of the propeller and the hull better. Systems that can be installed on the machinery and control the operation of the machinery so as to be very efficient, inverters. Yes, most of them made in China, by the way. Okay, maybe also Japan. But what is important is that we have the know-how to apply this equipment on board ships. And this is very, very critical because a vessel has very specific needs when it comes to environmental testing, when it comes to taking into consideration that it's an asset moving. It's like, imagine that you have a power plant which is moving in 4, 7, 8, before, and with a personnel that changes every 4 to 6 months. So we are making equipment which is ship specific, which is robust, which is easy to operate, which is remotely operated, because we are not allowed to operate remote anything aboard the vessels. And we also have the market. When it comes to what's next for Greece, for us, it is obvious that there is a huge opportunity for Greece to step up into this decarbonization of ships market and produce a lot of solutions. 35,000 ships plus is a very big market because the equipment is not cheap. This is an expensive piece of equipment. What we are lacking is, first of all, that our industry is not recognized by Europe as a priority, which is starting to change now, and this is because of defense. Because for defense, we need to have ships, and we need to build our own ships. We cannot have Chinese made ships. Now, if we want shipyards to be viable, this cannot be just by Navy. We need also the commercial operation. So we need support to the shipyards to build ships where we can put our equipment, but we also need incentives for the ship owners to prepare the European equipment. We need much more R&D, that was discussed. And what is also very, very critical is people. We need people. We need to train people. We need to reskill people, to upskill people, because what is coming is something that nobody knows. We are talking about installing systems that will burn ammonia on board ships. And I can guarantee you that no one now can operate any ammonia fuel vessel, period. We will need chemical engineers to be on board the vessels to do that. The last thing that we are doing, and this is what is in combination with what Ms. Sardi mentioned, is that we are making carbon capture systems for ships. This is going to be necessary in order for the vessels to be able to operate, to prolong their lifetime. Because right now, the vessels will need to be scrapped because they will not be able to deal with the new regulations. And I can tell you that the emissions of building a new vessels are millions of times more than operating a vessel for another 10 years. This can be done with carbon capture. And if we want to ride the wave of the carbon capture and the CO2 supply chain, we need Europe to be in the forefront to be able to receive the CO2 and receive it in a cost-efficient way, so that the owners will prefer this solution and will prefer it on the European. Thank you.
Okay, this is excellent. Turning now to Kostas Kartalis, who's going to give us, I guess, a synthetic view of where the environment and forces like that may intersect with production models of the economy.
Okay. Well, thank you, Nikos, Professor Vetas. Thank you for the invitation. I would like to start with the last point by Mrs. Polychronopoulou about carbon capture. I speak here under two hats. The first one is I'm a professor at the University of Athens on climate science. And the second hat is that I'm a member of the European Advisory Board on Climate Change, Scientific Advisory Board. So on Friday, it's still in embargo. It has been presented to the Commission. The Advisory Board will release its report about carbon removal, opportunities and risks in the European Union, and opportunities for scale-up. And in particular, with respect to specific sectors that have limited or no mitigation potential, there are special referrals in order to support their viability, what you said before. Shipping, aviation, steel, cement, and other specific activities. In addition to this, there's an extended discussion about permanent and temporary removal, because that's very critical for the environment and for climate, on the one hand, and also there's a discussion about new technologies like DAX, that is direct air capture, which is in a pilot phase in Iceland, and the biofuels case, which again, with respect to the carbon capture. So there is an effort to understand the needs of the market, and through science to define the solutions. I'm not sure how they will be implemented. It's a matter that has to be resolved in the future, but still, if you have some time, check on Friday the report by the Advisory Board. It gives a lot of information about carbon capture, the risks and the opportunities at the same time, and also a technological opportunity for the European Union to define a sector, an industrial sector, which is supportive for this specific need. Now, saying this, I would like to touch a parenthesis. I wasn't supposed to speak about this, but since you discussed about it. I just wanted to speak about the misconception that is rapidly expanding, that decarbonization is responsible for the high energy prices. And I just want to say that because it's exactly the opposite. The decarbonization and clean domestically generated energy market will reduce the prices. And this is very important to take into consideration because it gives you the opportunity to understand what's the real situation in the European Union. Of course, everybody has to admit that there's a competitivity gap. I mean, if you compare the prices, the energy prices, the wholesale gas prices between the European Union and US has 5 times cheaper energy prices. If you compare the industrial activities, the prices, the US has 2.5 times lower prices. So the European Union is obviously against a difficult situation. Competitivity is not the case at the moment. So what is important to say is that despite decarbonization also in the European Union, which is rather rapid, and it has been supported by a number of policy instruments, I just want to make a parenthesis and give a number. 44% of the electricity produced in the European Union comes from renewables today. And as far as Greece is concerned, it's 56%. The electricity produced from renewables is 56%. That shows that renewables have the capacity to stand and be a critical element in a resilience plan for an economy. I mean, in this country, we all know that we had a long energy crisis, but still, during the crisis, renewables had the space to advance and capture part of the market. It's not enough. We still have a strong dependency to fossil fuels as far as European Union is concerned. And this dependency has become even higher because of LNG. LNG is produced in the States through the revolution of the shale gas. It's cheap, but once it's been transported to the European Union, it has to first go through a number of chemical processes, regasification. And when it comes to the borders of the European Union, I mean to the ports, it's far more expensive than when it was produced in the United States. So the prices, energy prices go up again. So what is the solution with respect to this? Is to trust more renewable energies. Is it always possible? There are many obstacles. But still, the policy is to have energy efficiency. This is the first step. The second one is to deploy the renewables, both the wind and the solar. The third one is to work out the grids. The European Union has a major advantage. It can have an interconnected grid system because everything is on land. So all countries can exchange energy once this grid system is being produced. And the fourth pillar with respect to this policy is the storage area. The storage is the critical part. If storage practically reflects the optimism that is going to be ready by the end of this decade, that means that there's going to be a lot of potential and momentum with respect to renewables. And at the same time, I strongly agree with what was said by the first speaker, Mr. Athanasopoulos, that R&D is absolutely needed. At this point, we need R&D for storage, for green hydrogen, for new technology, for biofuels that can also support even the shipping industry in some sense. And R&D is not, I think, in this specific sector, it's not in the first priority of the European Union at the moment. This is my personal opinion. I'm not speaking on behalf of the advisory body. And at the same time, what is also important is to take note of the challenges that exist in the European Union as far as the deployment of renewable energy sources. Yes, there was the Repower EU that gave the opportunity to pre-select the areas where you're supposed to place wind farms and photovoltaics. And that expedited the implementation of this specific direction. But still, there are a lot of difficulties in many countries, not to mention the difficulties that we face in Greece, in expanding the siting of wind farms, mostly. There are a lot of reactions from the public. There seems to be an understanding that placing wind farms is running against the protection of the environment. I was always thinking why this is the case, why people accept fossil fuel industries in their own area, and once there is a farm, they get very upset. And this is because you never see the fossil fuel factory, as compared to, you just get the energy. And now you see the wind farm, you see the installations, and you see in front of you the production of energy, and you think that this is bad for the environment and bad for climate as well, and bad for the local society. Still, there have been cases where investments have been too aggressive. They didn't respect the carrying capacity of the area concerned. They didn't respect the need to communicate with the public and explain the plans, and that resulted also in great reaction and negative reaction by the public. So there's a need to speak better to the society in order to be able to promote the elements that will bring down the cost of energy and reshape cost dynamics. And this is very important to be understood also by the countries and the policy makers as far as renewables is concerned. Finally, China. Yes, China is the main player for many things. And to me, if I was to select one difficulty, it's the trade restrictions that may apply. And if the trade restrictions do take place, it will be very much more expensive to get the materials from China, and this will influence again the energy prices of electricity. So I'm not sure how quickly we can develop an industrial branch in the European Union to produce all the things that you said. I think it's too late already. But still, we need to have good relations. I mean, we have a difficult situation with the US. We need to have a better situation with China. We need to take into consideration that China has been expanding its efforts to Africa. They have been giving massive loans to African countries in order not to control, that's a bad word, but to cooperate with respect to the rare earth minerals. So they are expanding the market outside China. And in this way, they are taking more, they are grasping more in the competitivity sector. And this is something that has to be taken into consideration by the European Union, along with the need to relate the energy policy with the common agricultural policy. You may know that there's a tendency and a trend for agrivoltaics, not just photovoltaics, but agrivoltaics, because there is a complaint, I think very legitimate one, that you cannot place solar panels in areas where you cultivate. It's for agriculture. So you have to find a way out to protect the agricultural land and the food production, and also to comply with the territorial policy of the European Union, with the urban policy to some extent, and other different policies that sound very different from energy, but they are very much related.
Before we reiterate again, would you mind if I push you a little bit, Costa? Can I push you a little bit? So can you distinguish two stories? Because you started by describing a misconception that renewables raise costs. The people in the street do actually see higher costs. And at the same time, we do have a fairly successful penetration of renewables. So the story I should be telling the people in the street, if they ask me, is it that this is the nature of the beast? In other words, that we do have to invest a lot, and given what we are doing now, which investment is costly, we are going to reap the benefits down the road. Is this the story? Or is it the story that it is already fundamentally cheaper in some way, but we happen to live in turbulent times because of what has been going on globally, and that kind of masks the progress that has been made? What's the story I should be telling people so that I'm credible?
I have been telling this story to many people because
you can also tell me.
I have the opportunity. Yes, I will tell you. Just be a little bit patient. Okay. Well, I think we are already getting advantages from the introduction of renewables into the energy market. If in this country we didn't have the 56% production of electricity from renewables, the price of energy would be much higher as it is today. Now, it is high in Greece because there are a lot of externalities. There's fuel, we are importing fuel, which is expensive. We are importing LNG, and we are locked in LNG. That means that we are going to be feeling the impact of LNG and the high price for the United States for many years to come. And in addition to this, we have high taxes, levies and taxes. So the price of electricity, it's not just what is coming from renewables. There are other things that are being added, which have to be taken into consideration, but still the price is lower if there was no renewables. Now, what do I tell to the people? I tell them that we have to go through a long process because all the phase out of fossil fuels has to take 25 more years if the European Union is successful to phase out fossil fuels by 2050. By that time, every year will be better than the year before in terms of the energy dependency to fossil fuels. We're going to have less and less dependency. And since fossil fuels are expensive, we're going to have more and more cheaper fuels. I'm not a magician. I cannot tell you the prices, if that was the question. But overall, it is going to be a positive trend. And then by 2050, supposedly, if the Commission and the European Union is successful in phasing out, then the Union is going to be independent of imported fossil fuels. And let me give you a number. I know that's not easily communicated to the public because the public wants to see its own household. If 2050, we are going to be climate neutral, that means that instead of spending every year 650 billion euros, all the European countries together in order to import fossil fuels, you will have a domestically generated market with renewables, and you can spend those 650 billion euros for research, industry, competitivity, health, education, regional development. So this is a challenge. It's not just about climate change. It's about having an energy independent market in the European Union just through renewables and other sources of energy that are coming forward without imported fossil fuels. And this is, again, my personal opinion. This is what the United States do not want to. They don't want the European Union to be energy independent.
Okay, thank you. So we don't have that much time left. So let us try to be very efficient with the use of our time. What I would like to not push you, but ask you politely to do is to, if you could react from the viewpoint of the Commission to what you've heard in terms of what are the tools that we may now have and what may be suitable, especially to the three, in my eyes, very interesting business cases that we heard, and how they can be blended into things. Because if we, and the title of all this roundtable workshop is competitiveness, right? We cannot have all production be gathered around 2 or 3 countries in the EU, right? So would you like a quick reaction to this? And then after we get the 3 other panelists react, then you're going to have the last word and wrap up the whole workshop.
Thank you very much. I mean, I find it really fascinating to see what is happening on the ground, and therefore to understand. You have been talking about niche industries. I think you were saying that it cannot be centered around 2 or 3 countries only. But I think Greece and marine industry has always been very strong. Therefore, this is very much at the center of the marine industry in Greece. And of course, I think we have been accompanying, and I have been personally accompanying the project in Prinos for quite some time and have been spending time on that. And I was very much interested how it would develop, and therefore really supporting also the development. So I don't want to bring that all together, but I mean, if we now take it back to what the Commission is doing, then I think the cornerstone of this is the Bruegel report, and then going forward in terms of innovation first, and second, decarbonization and developing also these industries. And third, of course, as expressed in the competitiveness compass, the focus on security and focus on strategic autonomy. And therefore, of course, we have to cooperate with China, because in quite a number, I mean, you have taken the example of the batteries. And I think if I look at the battery schemes which are supported under the RRP, the batteries are coming from China. If you look at what has happened to Northvolt, which was, let's say, a great European company, and quite some kind of management failure in order to implement it on the ground. So, but all of that, I think, is being focused on then in the new mandate of the Commission, looking at R&D, looking at what is working in Europe, and not only with regard to 2 or 3 countries. And then, of course, I think the operationalization of that, or one of the first operationalization of that, is the Clean Industrial Deal. And I think you have presented it quite well, so that relieves me of doing that. But it must really come to the ground, and it must really then go forward in very, very close cooperation between the EU and the member states, because the EU, I think it's Brussels, therefore it's by definition a relatively abstract level. And then I think what we have been doing with the recovery plans is bring it to the member states, making sure that it's also translated into member state activity, and that all of that is further transformed into alignment with regard to EU priorities. And I will stop here.
So as explained before, I'm going to give the floor to perhaps let's do it in reverse order now to Ms. Sardi, Ms. Polychronopoulou, and Mr. Athanasopoulos. But before we do this, let us see actually if there may be some very quick question from around the table to our speakers that they can blend into their final round. If not, I think there is already enough material. Yes, please. Very, very short.
The question is, thank you. The EU businesses, the EU companies are faced with very tough restrictions operating within the EU market, environmental and social standards. If the European Commission does not apply the same concept towards third country businesses that operate within the single market, it's going to be impossible for the EU businesses to regain competitiveness. This is one question, very, very shortly. A second one, which is a more broad question in relation with the competitiveness compass. There are really very interesting elements within it. Many of them are included in the Draghi and the Letta report, of course. The cornerstone is the integrity and the completion of the single market. I'm not sure, convinced maybe better so far that this priority of integrity and completion of the single market is reflected in the competitiveness compass, although it's a framework. And the last point, which is a question, but also a concern, being a Greek citizen and having experienced the crisis, as many of us here in this room, is the following. My concern is that this new environment, which is going to be created, some of the initiatives to be taken are described in the text. For example, revision of state aid rules. Remark, Draghi said, yes, state aid, but EU-wide state aid rules, not national state aid rules, because not all member states have the same opportunities, the same fiscal spaces. So reform of the state aid, reform of the public procurement, rise of the threshold under which the national authorities would be obliged to call for a EU-wide call, reform of the merger guideline, and yes, I will make a full stop. My concern is that there is a risk that we were going to have a much tougher internal competition within the single market instead of proceeding to the completion of the single market, taking into consideration that the global environment and the global trade policies, as mentioned by the previous speaker, have nothing to do with the environment in which we've operated so far. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Podimata. I guess this is material you can blend into also the final exposition, because it's so now Ms. Sardi.
I almost forgot the question.
Okay, the question is building on what you explained before, but looking forward and thinking about the European priorities and funding mechanisms. If there are one or two steps for how the next few years can support growth in your area.
Yes, as I said, in our line of project development, we see two major risks. One is the lack of clarity, simplicity, stability in this making business easier effort. Since in contrast to other industries, or in the energy industry in particular, the CCS value chain is very little developed in terms of rules. It's only now that member states are trying to set up their own set of rules. I see there a severe risk of over-regulation, too many rules that may lead to very, very grave, I was just looking for the word, and the word is grave, to very grave delays. So this is, for me, number one. Number two, new projects are risky. There is a need for risk-absorbing measures so that it will be easier for financing institutions, for equity providers to secure the very much needed capital, because these are also very capital intensive investments.
Okay, excellent. Thank you. Floor to you. Same question. If we have people from the Commission here, how can we convince them that in particular areas, Greece can be a super case to show in 10 years, I think. And feel free to include the word China in your answer.
China is a bloodbath. I mean, competing in China to install European equipment to European managed vessels is close to harakiri. I mean, you need to be a masochist to go there. And I'm being very, very honest, because we are competing against the Chinese state. The companies against which we are competing are owned by the Chinese government. How can you compete? You cannot compete. The only way to compete is that we get support from the Greek ship owners. Now, if we want to be competitive over there, it's merely impossible. What we can do is convince the ship owners that our equipment and our shipyards are so good that they have to install them on board the vessels and overcome the fact that the shipyard is selling something with a guarantee for 1 year and think that they are going to use a vessel for 25, 30 years. This is the only way. So what we need to do is to produce advanced, cost-efficient, and price comparable equipment. We need to have a playground in Europe. We need to have vessels built in Europe. This is very, very important. And you know very well that shipbuilding, as you said, state aid. Shipbuilding, automotive, and steelworks, they have been under attack. This has to stop officially. Officially, this must be finished. At some point, Europe must say, yes, we support shipbuilding. I mean, in the US, they are talking about the Ships Act, and their plan is to build vessels in the US. Europe must see exactly the same thing.
And sorry, but you also explained, I would like you to amplify a little bit, that this gets to the heart also of the idea of having strategic autonomy and defense in Europe, because you cannot have, you cannot just have military production. You have to have the technology that surrounds all this.
Exactly, exactly. So you need to have shipyards that are technologically capable to compete and to make vessels even better than the other states. But for that, you need the experience of building the vessels. It's like in Greece, we cannot on our own build tomorrow frigates, even if the shipyards in Greece very nicely claim so. They need to partner with someone to do it. So we definitely need to have much more production. We need Europe to recognize the shipbuilding and the marine equipment industry as a critical industry for the sovereignty and for the autonomy of Europe. Because at some point, if we will not have any ships doing trade controlled by Europeans, what will happen? It will be exactly like the Chinese equipment for energy. It's going to be exactly the same thing. So we need all the necessary tools. I was thinking we have 11 tools that we would like. I was thinking if I should say the 11 tools, but I will keep this for another discussions. But we need to keep our technological sovereignty. We need to build vessels. We need to have constraints when it comes to the equipment used, especially for defense. I mean, using Chinese equipment on board the Navy vessels doesn't make any sense, actually.
Mr. Athanasopoulos.
Thank you. I will focus my last comments. I think when we were at university, there were a lot of economic theories about whether countries or Europe, let's say, as a mega country, should have industrial policy or not. And there are with intervention. And there are some economists say, no, no, leave the markets decide. We've seen China having industrial policies with 20 years or 30 years horizons. We saw Biden having industrial policies that perhaps have supported very much the American economy, and Mr. Trump now is taking the grapes from that. So I will urge Europe to get into industrial policies, but being very focused and not just generic. The second comment is, I think the Commission should build war rooms. War rooms that take quick messages on things that happen. I mentioned earlier on the antimonium. One would say, what is antimonium and why is it important? Antimonium is very, very important. It's not only important in the batteries we make, it's very important in defense. So if we realize that there is a problem, we need quickly to try and find the ways to convince China, who we import everything from refrigerators to TVs to cars to whatever, to find a solution to antimonium, because into any antimonium we may have. This is just an example. And our ability to react fast, that's why I talk about war rooms, makes industries survive or not survive. The third comment I'd like to make is that I sympathize with all the theory about the renewables and storage. I have a small concern that batteries at the moment work for 4 hours. And the technology to get into 8-hour batteries is far away, very far away. So I have some concerns on how much we can really save from pricing and batteries. But where the impact is direct into industries is what we call commercial industrial. I would look as Commission very hard, not on ESS grid, but on storage on specific companies that they can generate electricity with their own means and store it. These are much more complicated projects. They are not mass projects, but we can equip Europe at the industrial pace to reduce their cost much faster than waiting. The total inefficiencies across Europe, especially in the south, to hope on when we will interconnect countries, which it may take 20, 30 years. The last comment has to do with defense. The Second World War, many people have argued, was won by those that had the last gallon of oil, not the last bullet. I hope we will not have a Third World War, but the war that we play is going to be won by those that have the last vat on batteries, because the future of war is batteries. Batteries on soldiers, batteries on drones, batteries everywhere. The risk we have is, as in renewables, everything became a China lake. In defense, everything to become a US lake. So because US is going to push us to increase the defense budgets, hoping that all these weapons will come and will be bought by the US. That is going to be, for me, a very big bet on how Europe is going to stand on its feet to build defense industry or rebuild our business supplies. And I don't need to mention many submarine companies in Europe with torpedo batteries and submarine batteries. And we have a monopoly in many countries. Up until recently, we were hiding that. We were hiding because if EIB was seeing that, we wouldn't be allowed to get any loan because it was prohibited. Now EIB is rushing to say, no, 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 forget about that, no more these rules. So this is what we live. And we live a situation that we hide something that now everybody wants that. So defense is going to be very important, but the European Commission needs to be very thorough and very aggressive on how to make sure that this is going to be a European story and not a European import story. Thank you.
Thank you. I found this discussion extremely useful, exactly because it's not theoretical, but it was very practical. And I would now like to ask Johannes to wrap up not only this discussion, but the whole roundtable discussion of today's, including also some comments that were made before.
I mean, now I have the task to wrap up. And looking back at what we have discussed this afternoon, I think it was an extremely rich 2 panels going into different directions. And of course, if we take the keynote speech at the beginning, then it's even more. I think there was consensus in the end that competitiveness and decarbonization go together. I mean, that I would still put up front. And that this will also really be key for further improving Greece's positive economic performance over the last years, but also ensuring that Europe overall will be performing. If I now look at Greece, then looking back at least 10 years, 15 years, then Greece is still recovering from the economic and financial crisis of the previous decade, the pandemic, and of course also the energy crisis. And if you look at where Greece stands now, then Greece's economic growth is well above average. Therefore, it is going forward is expected to have expanded by 2.1% in 2024 and to maintain a broadly similar growth in 25 and 26, which is quite significantly above the EU average. Unemployment has significantly fallen, now below 10%. And also Greece's ranking in terms of competitiveness has improved quite well. It is not yet there where it should be, but it has improved quite well. We have discussed decarbonization at the electricity system. I think we both agree on 56 or 57% in 2023. I think in 2024, it must be already significantly higher after the discussion which we yesterday had with Minister Skylakakis on the electricity market. I think the deployment of renewables has exploded, and also the deployments of storage has gone quite significantly further. Therefore, this is clearly a success story. So all of that, and I'm come now to the recovery plan, all of that has been accompanied, if not powered, by the Greek recovery plan. Therefore, there is the Bank of Greece estimate that the GDP of Greece in 2030 will be, in 2026, will be increased by 6.9%. And not only by the investments of the recovery plan, but especially also by the reforms, which are part of the recovery plan and which the Greek authorities are being implementing. That means 180,000 additional jobs by 2026. And if I look at the plan, it's a very big plan. It's very much focused on competitiveness. And I think the points which I would like to make in terms of competitiveness, in terms of mentioning reforms, this is first the finalization of the cadastre reform and the digitization of it. Second, the revision of the judicial map, and therefore very much increasing the efficiency of the court system in Greece. Also including digitization, and then of course overall the digitization of the Greek public administration. I think that was a discussion which has been going on for really the last 10 years. And I think yesterday we have been discussing, Orestes, the digitization of the archives with overall digitalization of 1.6 billion pages. And therefore that will be a completely different public administration. In terms of investments, I would like to point out for the competitiveness, the loan facility.
which is the biggest overall measure in the plan with overall 18 billion. And it's one of the biggest measures overall in any of the recovery plans. According to a study which we have done from the Commission side, it will increase the GDP of Greece by 5.3% in 2030. And it has been really a huge success already, and it has been very well implemented. I've been mentioning really points which are directly related to competitiveness, but of course competitiveness is also broader. And in that regard, I would also like to mention the measures to respond and prevent natural disasters. For example, wildfires, and the Greek recovery plan supports measures such as the reforestation of 5,700 hectares, the creation of fire protection zones, and the acquisition of equipment and vehicles to respond to forest fires. I think as someone who likes to be in Greece, but who doesn't live in Greece, I think the look each summer, what is going to happen? Are there wildfires? What is going to happen there and how to respond to that? I think this is something which really needs to be tackled. The fourth point I wanted to make is on a social element, and this is affordable housing. With the Greek authorities, we have agreed last year to include a social housing element, therefore a reform on social housing, but also the investment for my home and for the renovation. And it has been very well taken up. And it's really a measure which is being implemented very quickly. Therefore, also there, the RF has shown its agility. Now, of course, the deadline looms, and the deadline it's 16 months away. If you take August, it's 14 months away if you take June 2026. And as already Declan said, it's a hard deadline. There's no extension, and there shouldn't be any illusion that there is an extension, but it's really a hard deadline in order to complete all that. Looking at what still needs to be done, therefore, 2/3 of the overall milestones and targets still need to be completed and assessed, and these are more than 240 milestones and targets. This also means that nearly 18 billion euros are still to be dispersed, therefore really a very, very significant amount of money, also in terms of GDP. But for that, all of that needs to be implemented. Therefore, there cannot be any wait and see approach. But what needs to be done is a pragmatic approach. We are in front of the next revision. We will need to have a pragmatic approach, which investments can still be implemented. If for objective circumstances they cannot be implemented, they can be replaced by other investments. And I would also encourage the authorities, and we have discussed it, to move forward on that. Because if this will not be completed, the money will in the end be decommitted. So coming to the future, and I think that was also part of one of the panels, last week the Commission published the roadmap to the next multi-annual financial framework. And the message is that this budget must be more focused, simpler, more flexible, and with a greater impact. So if we now take a step back and see also the communication on the roadmap, what should be remaining from the RRF? I think one of the points which should be remaining in substance is the priority of competitiveness. Competitiveness is considered in a broad way, therefore not only really, let's say, support the industry, but really also, for example, the wildfires, I said before. And of course, housing also has a competitiveness element because it increases the mobility of workers, employees, and it allows really to find a home close to the employment. The second point I wanted to make is then the features of the RRF, which should be kept, and this is the combination of reforms and investments. And I think we have been, the Bank of Greece study shows that, and we have been talking about reforms for quite a significant extent this afternoon.
just doing investments will not work if they are not the enabling reforms and the structural reforms in order to make Greece as well as Europe more competitiveness. Second point is the performance-based nature. Therefore, it shouldn't be cost-based, but it should look at outcomes. And we should properly define the outcomes in order then to look at that. One element which Declan also mentioned, when negotiating the recovery plan with Greece, but overall, of course, it was a we have done that in a very tight time frame. And therefore, we have done it with the central government without involvement of the regions and the municipalities. Looking at where cohesion is coming from, of course, there the starting point is very different. And that also means that while keeping the features of the RRF, we will in the future also involve regions and municipalities at a much broader scale than it was done for the RRF. So coming now to the conclusion, I think there was this Financial Times article a few weeks back, where the European periphery countries have turned into an anchor of stability for Europe thanks to their steady economic growth. And the article has traced this right back to Next Generation EU, and it was not only the Financial Times article. For example, I read a German newspaper yesterday which really pictured it in a very, very similar way. And therefore, through all the crises of the last, let's say, 10, 15 years, Greece and the EU have been through together. It is a testament to Greece that it is now indeed an anchor of stability in these difficult times. And my hope is that Greece can move from being an anchor of stability to speeding ahead, catching up on this lost decade of growth and realizing its economic potential. To summarize very clearly at the end, to do that, first, what is needed is to implement fully the Greek recovery plan, and therefore to do that until June 2026, and to have full attention to that and not being distracted. The second point is then from the European level is also to look ahead for the next multi-annual framework and to include really the good elements of the RRF into the multi-annual framework, while not neglecting the very positive elements which come from cohesion policy. And I stop here. Thank you very much for your attention.
Just to thank everyone who was here today throughout the 4 hours or something. And of course, looking forward perhaps in a year's time to see where we are. Thank you.